Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please welcome back to the stage Justin B. Smith, CEO and co-founder of Semaphore.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to see that the crowds are still here. It's going to be a great afternoon. Welcome to the World Economy Summit. I'm Justin Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Semaphore. For those of you who don't know, Semaphore, we launched 2.5 years ago with a very simple belief that journalism should be intelligent, transparent, global, and ideally nonpartisan. And today we've been around for 2.5 years with nearly 1 million subscriptions across the globe. The world's leadership class is increasingly turning to Semaphore's journalism for our balanced news. And when we were a very, very tiny company, we had this idea to found the World Economy Summit. I think we were 2 months old. And this was based on another simple insight, which is that the United States, which is the largest economy in the world, should host an annual gathering of the world's leading CEOs, which didn't exist. And that, of course, Washington, D.C., given these trends, was the right location for such a convening. So in our first year, as a tiny little pirate ship of a company, we had 5 Fortune 500 CEOs. In the second year, we had 25. And this year, we have 200, which has made... thank you. And these are not just... These are the half the Fortune 500 are here with us. And it's made the World Economy Summit the largest convening of CEOs in America. And we are just getting started. So hopefully this will be sort of a historical moment for all of us. We, of course, didn't imagine that this year's summit would take place at such a consequential time in the global economy. We're gathered here in D.C. at a moment of great uncertainty. Of course, a moment that demands a lot of clarity, clear thinking, leadership, wisdom, and dialogue across sectors, borders, and ideologies. And the broad macro mission of the World Economy Summit is really to advance these types of dialogues across 2 different dimensions, connecting the private sector, the CEOs, with leaders of the public sector, to one, have dialogues on how do we continue to catalyze growth for the benefit of the world, and 2, how do we simultaneously fortify resilience in an uncertain shifting global economy. And of course, you know this week, and many of you maybe have been there, across town, there's a number of other other meetings, but these are closed-door meetings, oftentimes political meetings hosted by the IMF and the World Bank. But our gathering stands at the opposite end of the spectrum because it's on the record, it's journalism-based, and it's nonpartisan. So our conversations really reflect the ethics of our journalism. They're carried out by all of our journalists. The values of transparency, intelligence, and global perspectives that I mentioned are at the heart of what we're doing. We're very grateful to 4 individuals who helped us build this platform. Some of them are here speaking across the next 3 days. You heard one this morning. That's David Rubenstein, Penny Pritzker, Henry Kravis, and Ken Griffin, who are our co-chairs. And really, it's because of their leadership and their belief in this project that we've been able to grow so rapidly, and so we're very thankful to them. This afternoon, we have a session which is in partnership with Verizon on a series of conversations on how digital connectivity is transforming how we do business, communicate with each other, and innovate. So conversations will cover everything from bids to take over TikTok, why the cars we drive are more connected than ever, and how Kentucky's governor connects with his constituents and beyond. But first, let's start with a short video from this afternoon's partner, Verizon.
Please welcome Sampath, CEO of Verizon Consumer, and Justin B. Smith, co-founder and CEO of Semaphore.
So this is actually one of the sessions that I've been looking forward to the most. There are very few people in our lives that actually are known by a single name, right? Madonna. Anyway, this is Sampath. Sampath is a dear friend, but also, I think, one of the most exciting corporate leaders in America. He represents the next rising generation of leaders, has such a bright, optimistic view of the world. But of course, he is the CEO of Verizon Consumer. Verizon, of course, is the largest telecommunications company, I think, in the world. Yep. Verizon Consumer is effectively most of Verizon, I think over 110 million customers. It's, of course, it plays such a critical role in building and maintaining the networks that keep Americans connected for their business, their lives, and so on. So welcome, Sampath.
Thank you.
So we are looking at the imperative role of digital inclusion. We've talked about this a lot over the years. Tell us what Verizon's doing, what other people can do, steps to ensure long-term digital inclusion in the US and beyond.
Yeah, so if you look at the world today, 2.6 billion people are not included in the digital umbrella today. 2.6 billion. In America, that number is around 42 million. So 42 million Americans don't have access to internet on a sustained basis. So that's the group that everyone's going after. And one of the things is, 10 years ago, if you didn't have access to the internet, maybe you couldn't watch video, you couldn't watch a cute picture, but now you can't bank, you can't have education, you can't do telehealth. It's a lot more germane to everyday living, and it has a huge impact on quality of life. So it's super important that we bridge the gap. And if you look at digital inclusion...
How long has the 42 million been at that level? Has it been...
It's coming down every year, but not fast enough. But Justin, if you look at it, there are three things I look at when I talk about digital inclusion. The first one, and everyone talks about accessibility. Do they have access to the internet? Do they have access to fiber? Do they have access to 5G? I think that's only 1/3 of the problem. The first is affordability. Even if you have access, can you pay for it? Second is accessibility of access. And third is usability. When you can pay for it, you have access to it, can you actually use it? Too much of digital inclusion is all about accessibility. More often than not, almost every American, except for the last few percentage, has access to internet. Whether it's a cable system, whether it's fiber, whether it's 5G, everyone has access to it. Where we have more work to do as a society and as a company is around affordability. We had the American Connectivity Program that doesn't exist anymore that provide connectivity to sections of society that could not afford it. So I think affordability is one. Second is usability. People still struggle with systems. So I think it's a long-term game. Every single day we build out networks. We'll probably in 5G, we'll end up covering between 5G and fiber, 100 million homes of broadband. There are only 140 million homes in the country. So the vast majority, Verizon itself will cover. So when you include me and my peers, we'll have really good coverage. Affordability and usability is the next.
And do you think that gap will be closed over time?
It'll have to be closed over time. Because
what time period? How long?
Look, in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to have to try and close the gap. But it's going to be more work on accessibility and more work on usability and affordability and accessibility, because someone's going to have to subsidize some of this, because some of them live in zones that have very high cost of service. So you're going to have some mechanism to support these type of environments and these type of people.
So let's move to a subject which is very popular in Washington and in political circles, which is, of course, the impact of the digital experience, the digital connectivity to well-being, to humanity. Obviously, don't need to cite all the different studies that talk about the detrimental effects of digital, either software or hardware. What initiatives are you taking at Verizon to sort of address those, either preemptively? What are your thoughts more broadly about achieving a healthy digital lifestyle and also benefiting from all these new technologies?
Justin, by and large, vast majority, the internet, the phone is a source of good. I mean, think about it. If the connection in this building wasn't good, none of you would show up today. It's very good. Verizon's taken care of it. But it's a thing. You don't go to places where there's no connectivity. So for the vast majority of time, the phone, the internet is an absolute good. It's a great thing. It's one of the greatest things ever invented. If you go back to history on that. But as the CEO of the largest consumer business in the world, I tell people, put your phone down. You have to put your phone down. We had the Global Day of Unplugging. But I think having a balanced and a healthy relationship with your phone and the digital internet is super important. You have to make space for other things in life. And the way things work is you can get caught up in it, the dopamine hits that you get, the amount of time that you spend. I mean, an average kid today spends 4 hours on social media every single day. My kid does 4 hours of homework, so he's not included in that. But an average kid spends 4 hours on that.
Well, of course, you hear these stories about the great founders of Silicon Valley, inventing these technologies, then not letting their children use those technologies. How about you at home? Do the children of Sampath also follow these rules?
The Mera Sampath family has an interesting relationship with the phones. So we have we try for balance, but what we do is we set certain boundaries. And in my house, a couple of boundaries. At the dinner table, no phones. Unless they're doing national security, which they're not, they're teenagers, they don't need phones. So we've been very keen on insisting that they don't use the phone during dinner tables. The second thing we do is in the bedrooms. They're not allowed to take the phones to the bedroom. Other than that, we don't monitor much. But those are the two boundaries we draw, that when you go up to your bedroom to either study or do anything or hang out with your friends, you don't need the phone. And we don't let them charge the phones in their room. We let them charge the phones outside in the corridor or next to mom's bed. And we find that enough to have the conversation. The other thing is having a logical conversation with the kids. Just telling them not to use the phone doesn't work that well. So one of the things we have something at Verizon called the Smart Family, which is an app that you and your kids put on, and it tells them how much time they've spent on different apps. You can monitor it, you can control it. It has an open dialogue with the kids saying, hey, you spent 4 hours today on the phone. The minute they hear, they're like, oh, I don't think I spent 4 hours. You spent 4 hours. And then that changes the conversation. So I think it's important for society. There's a balance needed. In fact, Virginia just went through a motion to remove phones in schools during the school hours. I think it's a good thing. Kids are there to study. Kids are there to play. The weather is good. Go out and do stuff.
So are you optimistic that the problems of the scourge of sort of digital, social media, other things can be solved through a combination of regulation, other forms?
I think so. Look, in any technology, any new advancement, there'll always be a few people who will have excess. That's just the nature of human behavior. That's how humans like to be with things. But if you are able to show people the balance, the second thing is also there has to be alternative things for people to do. One of the things I find with kids is just telling them not to use the phone doesn't work. Saying, hey, you want to go out for a walk, you want to go out and play ball, you want to go out and do something fun. That changes the conversation, the dialogue in the room as well. So between that, some technology solutions, a lot of it also comes down to parents. You can't have rules, regulations, technology solve it. Sometimes parents have to go and be a parent sometimes. You're not their friend, you're their parent. So I think the short answer is yes, I'm extremely optimistic and hopeful.
So let's shift a little bit to your running your business. What's interesting about, I think, not only your business, but also your leadership approach since you've been CEO, is this combination of a kind of a national footprint, which is made up of local footprints, and sort of the relationship between running a national company and a local company, and how you, as Verizon, manage that presence nationally, but also within local communities. How is digital infrastructure in particular being leveraged to personalize or localize, I guess, is the question I have.
Over the last 20, 30 years in America, there's been this great shift of nationalizing, going national on everything. Think about it. Your favorite restaurant used to be a local restaurant. Now it's a chain restaurant. Your local store used to be a store. Now it's a chain store. Your local barber is now Supercuts. So every single thing that you're doing has become national at scale. And if you look at Americans right now, they think Congress doesn't do a great job, but their rep does a fabulous job. So there's this huge people looking for local connections, local things they can get connected with. They want to go back to that neighborhood feel. We see that in our business. 2 years ago when I took over this business, I went to Phoenix. It was probably May in Phoenix, very warm. And there was a picture of a Christmas tree with snowflakes falling off it. And I thought it's very awkward in Phoenix in May to have a picture like this. And then I started digging and it says, oh, someone in New Jersey decides which picture goes to which store. And that was the whole thesis, that we have to get more local. So we took a national brand. We have 8,000 stores and just went massively local. We divided the country into 55 territories. Each one is run slightly differently. Then, for example, in Miami, we had local artists come and paint murals in all our store. We give each of the store managers some flexibility in how they manage, what music they decide. It has changed how people look at our brand in a very, very meaningful way. So I think you're going to see this more broadly in America. National brands are going to try and get more local, connect with local neighborhoods. Because the second thing is also cost of penetrating national brands is going up. So there's a cost factor to it, but there's also an efficacy, and humans want connection with their neighborhoods.
So it's interesting. So you have these local footprints. You've got the risk of digital wellness, but also you've got the opportunities of digital connectivity and innovating around digital connectivity to bring people closer together, to bring businesses closer together. What are you doing at Verizon on that front?
Look, I think the first thing is technology actually helps with localization. So for example, you want every store to feel a little local, have a local feel. You can use technology to do that. So for example, earlier we used to have 8,000 stores, we used to print posters. Every store had a certain posters and it has to be printed. But now we have these large screens that can be programmed very easily, so every store feels local to a local feel there. Same with music. We used to have the same music running through 8,000 stores. Now everyone using technology, they can build their own playlist at the local store to do that piece. The third thing we are doing is trying to use the Verizon store network to be a local community place. We are starting to host digital wellness workshops, starting to hold workshops on how to use your phone, how to manage cybersecurity properly, how do you not get scammed by things. So we want it to be a hub. We want it to be a hub where people come. We see that during emergency situations. I know people talk about the Waffle House, but you should talk about the Verizon store, because invariably the Verizon store tends to be one of the first stores to open up when there's a national emergency or a hurricane or a flood, because we plan for it and we want it to be the center of the community, providing water, providing charging, providing connectivity. So we want people to think of us as a local brand that has a lot of presence, and hence you can call us a national brand.
So it's interesting, this thread of digital wellness. You seem to talk about it almost in every answer that of the questions we've asked. Is that, how high of a priority is it from you in the C-suite, in the corner office? Is it, and how far are you taking that particular thread of a set of ideas or priorities across everything you're doing nationally and locally?
Look, I think it's core to our business. Look, our business is very simple in some way. People ask us about what our strategy is. I'm a strategy consultant. I spent decades there. End of the day, we want to connect people and connect things. That's it. It's very interesting for a company our size and scale. I can tell you our strategy in 5 or 6 letters, which is connecting things and connecting people. That's all the business we are in. And then when you scale that out, we want to be local. We want to have a brand that people can connect with, feel more human. We don't want to people think of us as a corporate brand, in a sea of sameness. We want people to think there's a personal connection to it. And that's why digital wellness is super important. So it's core to what we do. We build our products around it. We design our UX around it. So it's pretty core to our being. And look,
it's not something you're used to the phone company talking to you about, right? No?
No, the phone directory used to be big. It's the most unusable thing, if you remember. Yeah. So we are working on everything to make it easier for people to use. Even something as small as our router.
And customer service?
Customer service. We'll get to that in a bit. But if you look at our router, the big box that comes in the home, our router is 50 to 75% bigger than our competitors. You're like, the whole world is going to miniaturization. Why are we going towards a bigger router? The part is home Wi-Fi is so important for us. There's no better way to piss off your kids than have bad Wi-Fi in the house. There's literally, turn off your Wi-Fi, they'll come down for lunch in 30 seconds. I do that as well.
And learn to play guitar, too, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So I think for us, we've taken some of the design principles and said, look, if you have a larger Wi-Fi, it has a larger antenna, it'll cover better. So using some of the digital tricks, the digital wellness to design core of our products, has been a thing for us.
So I want to totally shift gears here. We just have a small amount of time left, but obviously the question that many of the CEOs that are here across these 3 days are being asked is, given the shift in the domestic global policy environment over the last month or so, a lot of people seem to be sort of pausing and reassessing and waiting to figure out what to do. Not so much for Verizon. Obviously, you're more of a domestic business, but what would your advice to other CEOs, or what advice do you give to your CEO or others?
Yeah, look, I think there are two pieces. One is everyone thinks, oh, this tariff thing is a new thing, but there's always been large uncertainties every 4 or 5 years in business, going back to maybe even the Stone Age. You always have uncertainty, but when you're in the moment, you feel like it's the biggest crisis you've ever faced. But when you go back and look at it, think about it. COVID was only 5 years ago. We thought the whole world was going to shut down. Before that, we had the great financial crisis. We thought we couldn't, there were runs on banks and things like that. So in the moment, it sounds very big. It is very big, but you got to step back and look at the broader context that things like this happen. The second thing is there's an evolving school of management which says you have to hold your long-term strategy and your end goal with a very firm grip. But with a very light hand, you have to hold the principles on how you get there. And there's cognitive dissonance in this, which is you have super conviction that, for me, I want to connect every single American. I want to connect them. I want to have the best internet experience. I'm holding that very firmly in my head. But I'm also holding very lightly in how I get there. It could be through fiber. It could be through wireless. It could be through other technologies to get there. Some could be funded by us. The government can help in some ways. And it's the ability to hold both of these, but also you have to bring your investors, your employees, your board of directors along with that. That is not an easy thing to do. So what frameworks do you have to set this up? Because when you're in a crisis, setting up a framework like this doesn't work well. So in peace times, you have to set up frameworks that says we have to be agile, we have to think about this, so that when you get into situations like this, you can navigate through it. Yeah.
Last question. Would you mind sharing, I know you've had this frame about, which is a little bit similar to what you just described, about the skirmishes of the moment, but actually where, if you keep your eye on the horizon or on the your firm grip on the end result, give us a sense of your philosophy here, because I think people could use some of that good cheer.
I think the next 20 years in America is going to be the greatest 20 years ever in the world in any country. Just think about that. We're going to have, of course, great internet. We're going to have some of the greatest advancements in healthcare. We're going to have the greatest advancements in AI, in robotics, in computational biology, in computational geology. We're going to have some of the greatest investments going to happen over the next 20 years in America. No other time in history we've had so many good things in front of us to do that. Now, if you take a long arc of time, you always have these skirmishes. I call them skirmishes. Tariff is a skirmish. GFC was a skirmish. COVID was a skirmish. But it's all the goodness is in front of you. And if we lean into that, one, your day will go better. It's a very practical thing. You have something to look forward to. The sun does rise in the east every day. But second, it also, you don't lose time. Because this is a time where there's uncertainty. And some competitors are going to slow down. They're going to do different things. They're going to wait and watch. You have an advantage. You have a time advantage because you're playing the long game there. So I'm extremely optimistic for all the great thing that's going to come in America in the next 20, 30 years. And for us, getting the digital infrastructure right is super important for us. Because none of what I said is going to happen if you have a bad broadband connection, bad fiber connection, or a bad 5G connection. So that's our job. We're going to have the best digital infrastructure anywhere in the world. And then all of you out there, go and build some of the most magical things you've ever built.
All right. On that note, please join me in thanking Sampath. Great job.
Please welcome Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, and Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson, CEO Editor at Semaphore.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and particular thanks to Mary Barra for being with us. Mary, you joined GM in 1980. The theme of this session is the digital road. Would that have meant anything to you back when you were inspecting fenders at Pontiac?
Well, you know, I would say I actually was one of the first classes to type my thesis on a mainframe. So it was beginning from at that point in time. But it's been quite a journey when you think of all the technological advancement. And frankly, it's going to, I think, accelerate even more as we move forward.
We're going to be getting into what's happening at GM in EVs and autonomous driving. And I think it's a kind of useful to remember this has been a journey, hasn't it, of technological investment. But we have to start with the obvious story of the moment, with what tariffs mean for your industry and your company. Right now, the US automotive industry is facing a 25% tariff, plus obviously higher tariffs than that on anything you import from China, which is a considerable feature of the global supply chain. Can you bring us in on your conversations with the president, with the administration? I know you've had a direct line through this process. There were moments where it looked as though you and a couple of your peers had, won a bit of progress and a bit of a reprieve for the industry on the initial imposition of tariffs. What's that conversation been like?
Well, I think first off, if you step back, the president and the administration want to have a strong manufacturing sector in this company, and I think they very much believe they want to have a strong U.S. Auto industry. So from that perspective, we're very much aligned. I would say the conversations I've been having for the last several weeks have been very productive because I think understanding our business is capital intensive. It's multi-year cycles of how we invest. And then we have a very complex supply chain. And so I think there's been a lot of effort to really understand our industry and for us to understand what they're trying to achieve. During the last Trump administration, when USMCA was renegotiated, we're one of the, I'd say one of the fewer, one of several, but not all OEMs actually, or auto companies, I should say, not use the term OEMs, made sure we comply with USMCA. Right. And so I would also say from after COVID, after the semiconductor shortage, we've really worked on having a resilient supply chain, meaning that having a little less of the global complexity in our supply chain just because of the difficulties that we saw. So I think it's been good communication so they understand. And I think, going forward, our message is making sure they understand what the auto industry, how it operates, so we can be competitive and not be put at a disadvantage to our foreign competitors. So, and I believe that is the goal of the administration and the president.
If nothing were to change, what would the impact of the current tariffs be on GM?
Well, I have earnings next week, so we'll be able to hear more about that. We'll talk more about that then. But again, I do believe, based on the constructive conversations that we're having, that is not the intent.
You think there is some? Do you think the president's persuadable here that we'll see a pullback?
I don't think I would use the term persuadable. I think the president, again, going to the goals he stated all along of wanting to have a strong manufacturing base in this country and a strong auto industry, will make sure that the policies he puts in place are going to achieve that. So that's the way I look at it.
So let's dive into that. I mean, this does seem to be an area of overlap. The administration has a clear desire to see more manufacturing jobs in the U.S. GM's invested more than $35 billion in U.S. manufacturing, I believe, over the last decade or so. What perspective does that investment and your experience give you on where the U.S. can still win in manufacturing?
Well, first of all, I definitely believe that the U.S. can still win. I think there's so much innovation that is happening in this country, and I think all of our global competitors are very capable. So I take everybody very, very seriously. And actually, we've invested in the last 5 years, we've invested $60 billion. And so very significant investments that we've made, and to give consumers choice between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles. And so we're well positioned from that perspective. But I think as we look at, though, and understand that investment, because it's very significant, we need to help people understand that certain things can't move quickly. Everything can be moved over time, but we also have to do it effectively, and we have to do it in a manner where we're still competitive globally, because this is a global industry.
Over time, is it your intention to bring more of your manufacturing to the US?
Well, one of the important things that we need in our industry is, first of all, I need clarity, and then I need consistency. Because again, as I said, if a new vehicle, a brand new vehicle comes out every 5 or 6 years, to make those investments and to be good stewards of our owners' capital, I need to understand what the policy is. And so we've already made some shifts of leveraging capacity that we already have, and looked at where components are supplied from. So we've been able to make, I'd say, important changes already. But any significant changes, we need that clarity to make sure we're making the right ones.
So we're in a period where you're, I would suspect you're lacking that clarity. Right now, how are you managing the company? What's it changing about the decisions you have to make pending more clarity on what the tariff picture is going to be longer term?
Well, I think one of the things of leveraging this time is to really be challenging the whole organization to be efficient. And I think that's always a great message. So driving efficiency, getting rid of bureaucracy, making sure what we're spending money on is really going to lead to our longer term vision from a company perspective. And so that's where we're focused now, and on the fundamentals of our business, making sure we're safely building high quality vehicles that consumers want to buy. And right now, I think it's important when people, and we'll talk more about this next week, is our core business is very strong. We have a business where our vehicles are in strong demand. We're actually at the very low end of incentives compared to the rest of industry. And frankly, one of the measures that is used in the auto industry is, what is your day supply? Our day supply is very low because consumers are really responding to our vehicles, right, which gives me great pride because I'm very proud of our team that's delivered beautifully designed vehicles with the right technology, the right features, the right functionality.
So I spent a lot of time with your fellow CEOs. Some of them were just in China at the China Development Forum, and a handful of them came back and said, wow, we just saw these Chinese cars that BYD and Geely are making. They've come on a long way. Right now, when you put a GM car up against some of the best of your Chinese competition, how does it measure up?
Well, I regularly go to China, so I've seen the progress. And again, I think that they're a formidable competitor. I think we also have to understand that the industry is subsidized by the country. I think that's important to note. But when we look and look, component to component, technology to technology and segment, I would say we stack up quite well. And we've done that work and, looked with a very, detailed eye of understanding everything.
I mean, you talked about the sort of competitive landscape in the context of how the administration should be thinking about policy, about how Washington generally should be thinking about policy for the industry. Is China the particular focus of your competitive concern right now?
Well, again, as I said, I take every competitor seriously. I think you're foolish in any industry not to take everyone seriously. But I think really I believe the administration is looking to do is to create a level playing field.
Right.
And there are many countries where it's been very easy to export vehicles to the U.S. with a very low tariff rate, and there's many countries around the world that the tariffs are quite high, and frankly, the non-tariff trade barriers are even higher. So I generally believe in free trade, but I think you have to have a level playing field, and I think that's what the administration is looking to achieve.
So you talked earlier about the customer choice you're trying to enable by offering both EVs and internal combustion engines. Can you ride both horses well forever?
Well, I think over the longer period of time, electric vehicles are going to be the consumer's choice. I mean, if you've had an opportunity to drive an electric vehicle, never having to go to the gas station, the fact that you have instant torque, EVs, if you do what we did and create a dedicated EV platform, really opens up a new design language, and I think that's one of the reasons our EV portfolio is doing so well. So I think over time, but I think when there's a couple barriers right now. One is price, because we're still working on getting battery technology to lead to a more competitively priced vehicle when you compare it to an internal combustion engine, and then also charging. When you look at most people that own an EV right now, they also have I call it ICE, but an internal combustion engine vehicle in their garage. And so if they're day-to-day, the EV works well. If they're going to go on a long journey, they're not exactly sure, they take their internal combustion engine vehicle. for most people, they only own one vehicle. Or if they own two, they need that vehicle to support, the two people going to work, taking care of the family, taking care of all their other responsibilities. And that's where a robust charging network becomes important. So I believe that will get better quarter after quarter, year after year. That will give people that, I'll say, that confidence so they don't have charge anxiety when they go on a longer road trip.
Is enough being done on that infrastructure side at the moment?
I think we're making a lot of progress, but I think it's going to take some time and it's going to take investment. But we are part of an industry consortium. We work to have access to the Tesla charging network. We also are making investments ourselves with Pilot Flying J, which gets on the interstates, and so that's a very important investment for us because it's the highest rated charging experience right now. So I think it will come over time, and then people just have to be aware of it.
Right. So tell us about the kind of internal challenge of transforming GM for this the kind of EV era. You brought in some really interesting senior leaders in the team, from a head of software from Apple, a chief AI officer from Cisco, new battery lead from Tesla. How's this technology challenge changed how you think about the skills you need in your top team?
Well, I think one of the things I've learned being in this position for over 10 years now is, you have to have the best talent. And in our industry that is so competitive and moving so quickly, and the fact that it's a bit of a longer cycle, you can't afford to get it wrong in your first cycle. And so that's why I've really been focused with my senior team of having the right people who have the experience and the knowledge. And I've seen it pay off with the people that you just mentioned, whether it's the battery lead that we brought in, Kurt Kelty, or Mike Abbott and the team he's brought in. We have running our software and autonomy is all, people that have that experience. And what's really cool about it, though, is as they've come in, the people who have been at GM who know how to do great vehicles with great dynamics and great performance, they've learned a lot from the people who have joined. But the people who have joined have learned a lot of, what it takes to do a great vehicle. So I feel really good about how the team is working together. And they just want to win. And so many people who have joined the company, they believe in our mission of what we're doing to create a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. But we're always going to be guided by the consumer because, for most people, buying a vehicle is a very, very significant purchase for them. It's either the most important or the second most important after a house. So recognizing and really focusing on that customer and giving that customer choice, I think, is what will lead to our success. So that's why I'm so proud of where the team is and where we're headed.
So my Semaphore colleague, Reed Albergotti, took a 12-hour journey in a Cadillac Escalade not long ago and concluded that autonomous driving technology has crossed a threshold and there's no going back. What is your strategy here, and what do you think it's going to take to get autonomous technology into much wider use?
Well, first of all, we're gated by safety. And so we're going to make sure, I'm very proud of the fact that our Super Cruise technology that he experienced and if you haven't experienced, I encourage you to go to a dealer and take a test drive. But you can take your hands off the wheel, feet off the pedals. You still need to pay attention because it is a driver assistance technology. It's not complete autonomous. But you'll arrive at your destination much more relaxed. Again, I've been in the business for a long time, and this technology is 85% of the people who have experienced say they would either not buy a car that didn't have it or would strongly prefer it in their next vehicle. And external groups, I think most recently Motor Trend, said we have the best technology. Now with the team, that software team that we have working with the vehicle team, they're now working on how do we take what's called level 2 autonomy to level 3. And then level 4 is when you get that the vehicle is responsible and the individual is really no longer required to pay attention all the time. And so we're on that journey. We'll share more about that as we go through the year. We made the decision last year with Cruise that was focused on robotaxi and personal autonomous vehicles, that our business was really personal autonomy. And so we've successfully integrated an incredibly talented group of people working now on personal autonomy. So I'm very optimistic, but we will always be gated by safety.
All right. Mary, thank you very much. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was terrific.
Please welcome Martin Schroeder, Chairman and CEO of Kyndryl, and Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson, CEO Editor at Semaphore, remains on stage.
Awesome. Great to see you. Thank you very much. So Martin and I caught up only a few weeks ago in New York, and Martin has the distinction of featuring in the CEO Signal newsletter this morning. So if you haven't caught up with that interview on semaphore.com, then I recommend it, because we went into much more than we may get to here. But Kyndryl, for any of you who aren't familiar with the company, is the former IBM IT services business. Was it built by Lou Gerstner? Is that right?
I think it started around Lou's time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so you now have 80,000 people, 16 billion annual revenues, and customers including the world's largest banks, airlines, telcos, manufacturers, insurers. So this gives you a pretty deep interest in the digital infrastructure we're here to discuss. Tell us, first of all, what we're talking about when we talk about digital infrastructure.
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity, Andrew. Nice to be here. So Kyndryl designs, builds, and manages the IT infrastructure that the world relies on every day. As an example, the 70 leading banks have a consortium. We run those systems, and those are the systems that clear $7 to $8 trillion worth of currency trades every day. We run the systems for credit card companies that process $3.5–4 billion worth of approvals per day. We run the systems for healthcare companies that generate 100 million lab results that need to be ordered, managed, tracked, delivered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the world's digital infrastructure is what allows the world to operate in the way it does. And it's also the digital infrastructure then that needs to be ready for regulatory changes. It needs to be ready for the opportunities in AI, as an example. It also needs to be ready for the bad guys, the risks that exist out in the world. So the world's digital infrastructure is what you experience. That's what we run.
So it's all running smoothly, and you guys aren't really needed. But tell us, before we get on to the future of digital infrastructure, tell us what you actually see on a daily basis about the kind of health of it now. What is the average company's digital infrastructure looking like?
So first, let me share what our data says, and then I'll share how people feel about it, because it's a little bit different. Our customers tell us, through our readiness report, our customers tell us 90% of them say we're world-class as we sit here today. And our data, maybe that's a little bit optimistic, but our data on how much of the world's infrastructure is end of life and how much runs at global best practice and how many of the fixes are done in an automated way, our data says the world's digital infrastructure, private enterprise, it's been invested in, and they should feel pretty good about it. That doesn't mean that the bad guys aren't out there attacking it every day. That doesn't mean that there are things that go bump in the night. But by and large, as we sit here today, the world feels that its digital infrastructure, 90% of them feel it's world-class. When you ask them, however, are you ready for the challenges ahead? Are you ready to take advantage of AI or Gen AI? Are you ready to take advantage of cloud technologies where the innovation's showing up? Are you ready for regulatory changes? Are you ready for skills shortages? Then all of a sudden that 90%, fewer than 40% feel like they're ready for what's next.
Right.
So there's this dichotomy in their opinion, in their view of how, how are we today and what's coming, tomorrow, week, month ahead.
So what is it about that step change to what's coming tomorrow, to particularly AI, that makes it so challenging for your clients?
So AI is, it's a good question, because it's sort of, I think it's sort of a good example of, AI has to start with data. Everybody says the same thing. AI starts with your data, and that's certainly true. AI also starts, though, with skills. So companies don't feel like they have skills. And even if you had the data right and the skills right, there's a long list of things that you have to be ready for. So as an example, again, given what we run in Mission Critical, the minute you decide that I'm going to try Gen AI in this part of my Mission Critical application, and I'm going to go, I'm going to move my data there and bring it back. You expose yourself now to new security risks. You lose something in resiliency that needs to be figured out. And then, of course, there's a pretty big cultural element to AI and deploying AI. So they don't feel ready because sometimes their data's not in the right shape. Sometimes their infrastructure is not as contemporary and modern as they need it. Sometimes the skills that they have aren't. They don't feel like they're ready.
But what are you advising them, clients to do, or what's the work that you see is most needed to get ready?
Yeah. So again, from a technical perspective, there's a lot of work to do on data, how it's architected, where it sits, how you move it around, how you answer if you're in a regulated industry. How do you answer the regulators' questions? The regulators ask simple questions. Where's your data right now, and who can see it? Those sound easy, but they're very difficult in an AI context. So there's work to be done technically to get ready to use AI. There is work to be done with the teams who have to use it and the skills necessary. And there's credentialing, there's experience, and then there's the world of the user. We'll have another study out in May that talks about AI and how people feel about it. And one of the learnings from that is that about half the people are scared of AI. And they're scared of AI for a number of different reasons. But what it says to us is that, and we do this in Kyndryl, we've made AI about people and AI. But that's a case for change. And while AI is going to do a lot, AI is not going to make its own case for change. The leadership has to make a case for change. And
what do you think the percentage of inside Kyndryl is of people who are scared of AI?
It's very few now, but it's a great question because when we do what we do with a platform called Kyndryl Bridge. Kyndryl Bridge allows us to see our customers' infrastructure, allows us to fix things before they become problems. It allows us to identify patterns. It allows us to, like I said, do what we do. But when we started putting Kyndryl Bridge into customers, I will tell you, for very good reasons, a lot of the Kyndryls were like, well, hold on, I want to understand how it's making a decision. I want to understand what it's going to do. Our teams take great pride in running the systems that matter, and so yeah, they were in the beginning. They wanted to prove it has to prove itself, and they have to be comfortable that it's going to do the right thing for their customers. And that's why for us, it's always been about person plus machine. It's always been about how do you take for us what we call actionable insights. We're generating 4 million actionable insights for our customers a month. How do you take those actionable insights and make sure you're looking at them and you're understanding them? You're not just punching it out into the world to take systems down.
What did you do internally to get people over that fear factor? And was this about sort of governance structures you put around it? Was it more about the leadership messaging?
So it's all of those things. So some of it is just the raw technical credentialing, making sure people understand how the technology works, how to use it, how it's making decisions, familiarity with it, play around with it before we actually, let it automate more things. So some of it is the technical depth, some of it is the experience. And then like I said, there is a big cultural element to this to make sure people know it's about them and the machine together. They know that they are a big part of this. And when you're running mission critical and people really do care about delivering a great service to, we run airports in India, right? And people don't want to be part of something, well, the airport's down because Kyndryl, right? So they really do care about it. So it's about making sure that you're bringing people on this journey with you.
So as you say, you have this incredible insight into where your clients are at on their AI journeys, what the work they're actually doing. Do you think we're in an AI hype cycle right now, or are most of your clients getting good returns on the investments they've made in AI?
So no and no.
Okay.
So
Tell me,
no, I don't think we're in a hype cycle. The way we operate today is already different from how we operated a few years ago. It will be different again in a few years. And that's in sort of our machine learning sort of functions that we have deeply embedded into Bridge. We are also doing thousands of different things with Gen AI, trying to figure out how to use it. And our customers tell us the same thing. Our customers tell us, roughly 3/4 of them say we're experimenting with AI some form or fashion. But out of the 75%, maybe 40% are at the point of a great ROI.
Right.
And again, I think it's because there is data architecture work that has to happen. So if you're in the data architecture phase of your project, you're going to answer the question yes to the first, are you doing something with it? And they're going to answer no to the second because you haven't seen the returns. And again, as I mentioned, there's a data architecture, there is ultimately running some experiments, and then again, moving it into mission critical, that a whole new range of challenges. Once you get through all of that and you can operate at scale, I think that's the 40% who are seeing the ROI.
Is there something that unites that 40%? Is it just bigger companies or companies that have spent more on it, or what's the common thread that leads to?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I think it is skills, and skills, not only the technical skills, but skills that have created frameworks to really understand what does good look like. I don't know that we universally, I don't know that our customers have great frameworks everywhere to understand what the benefit of AI is and how it might be applied. So there's skills on the technical side, and there's skills on kind of the business management side. And then there is a kind of a common thread on the leadership element that builds the case for change,
right,
so that you actually use it. Again, with half the people afraid of AI, you can imagine rolling something out that, if you have half the people not using it, you're really not going to see an ROI from that.
All right, so we're in Washington. I want to end on a policy question. You've argued, I know, that digital trade is the backbone of modern economic growth. We're at a moment where physical trade seems to be hitting a few roadblocks. Are you worried the same thing's going to happen to digital trade?
Well, I'm worried, but because it's so important. But I think what I've seen in this administration's prior incantation were a ton of reasons to feel like they understand digital trade and what's needed. And the two things I would point to, if you look at USMCA, USMCA has fabulous digital trade provisions. It has all the right things and none of the wrong things. And then that was followed up with the Japan-US Digital Trade Agreement, which again has these wonderful and necessary elements to it. So while I completely agree with you, the focus is on physical goods, at least we have a marker that says digital trade is well understood in this administration. Digital trade, at least they know what good looks like.
Okay. Well, Martin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.
Appreciate your lesson about leading people on the path towards AI change.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See you again. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please welcome Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky and Stephanie Rule, host of the 11th Hour on MSNBC and NBC News senior business analyst.
Governor, thank you so much for your time today. Why don't we start with what is in your special sauce? You are the two-time governor of the state of Kentucky, a state that Donald Trump won handily. So what's so magical about you, sir?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think it's about focus. It's about a recognition that while I run for a political office, most people when they wake up each morning aren't thinking about politics. They're not thinking about the next election. They're thinking about their job and whether they make enough to support their family. They're thinking about their next doctor's appointment for themselves, their parents, or their kids. They're thinking about the roads and bridges they drive each day, the public school they drop their kids off at, and they're thinking about whether they feel safe in their community. And I think as you look back at Kentucky in the last 5.5 years, we've moved the needle on all of those areas. And yes, people care about different issues, but if you're struggling to afford that next prescription for your child, it's hard to get to anything else.
But where's the disconnect? Because when you mention the roads and bridges, I think about DOGE cuts and all the cuts the federal government is making. When you talk about dropping your kids off at school, I think about the Department of Education getting gutted. And when you talk about jobs, I think about these trade tariffs and what they are doing to small business, big business, and obviously the markets. How do you put all those things together and speak to, what do the people in your state tell you? Because they are still deep red Donald Trump supporters.
Well, but I think what you're seeing nationally are numbers significantly changing because of exactly what you're talking about. I believe that Donald Trump is our president because at the end of that election, he convinced the last group of movable voters that his opponent was distracted while he would focus on prices and helping you get by at the end of the month. But there is no question that he's done anything but that since being in office. I've never seen anything in politics more attributable to one person and one person alone than his tariff decisions that are devastating our economy. So what I'm seeing are small businesses that had supported this president that are pulling back. They get materials in from China that they can't source in the United States. And so what it means for their margins is they're going to have to lay off 10% of their workforce. Those are people they know in small communities. What I'm seeing about families when they see these studies that say it could cost them $4,700 more a year, that doesn't just hurt the budget, it blows a hole in the budget. But I tell you what will move people more than anything else, and that's the potential Medicaid cuts that could come out of Congress. Medicaid covers the people we love the most in this world, our parents and our kids. 50% of all Kentucky kids are covered by Medicaid. 70% of all of our long-term costs are covered by Medicaid. And rural health care will cease to exist if they do major cuts. So think about how we've expanded health care in Kentucky. We now have 2 pediatric autism centers in eastern Kentucky in Appalachia. Parents,
Okay, I'm happy about
parents
it.
used to be told, me too.
Yeah.
Parents used to be told that they needed to drive to Lexington a couple hours, or even more painfully, they needed to move for the health care of their children. All of that we would lose. These rural hospitals are typically the second biggest employer in any community behind the public school system. And what it would mean is whether you have private insurance or on Medicaid, you drive hours to get the care you need from the same doctor who lost their job in your community. I'm seeing it on the ground right now. This will cause the American people to nearly revolt if they make these cuts.
What about when you talk about your regional hospitals, I think about what DOGE cuts are going to do to regional economies.
Yes.
When you think about what a massive employer your hospital systems are,
Yes.
the University of Kentucky, you don't have lots of big businesses there. But if we suddenly see huge cuts to NIH, huge cuts to public universities, and just lots of federal jobs get cut, what will that do to your economy? And we haven't even touched business yet.
It'll have a major impact, both from jobs and from people struggling to get by. So there's been an announcement that a Social Security office in Hazard, Kentucky, also in eastern Kentucky, is going to close. At the same time, they're going to shut down the call-in number for people to call that have questions. So what they're going to have is a senior having to drive from Hazard a couple of hours to another office, and they're not going to have all the paperwork they need because they weren't able to call the number and figure out what they needed. And what that means is someone who paid into the system, who's entitled to it, and who relies on it just to get by will not be able to get that payment for that month. You look at NIH cuts, and it's significant for the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville, but it's also significant for a lot of our families. You know, as governor, I've appropriated more money to childhood cancer research than any other governor in our past, and I meet these families. These families have to be told sometimes that there is no cure and that there are no other possible avenues to pursue, and no parent should ever have to hear either of those. The idea that we would stop the research into something afflicting children like that is just wrong, and it's cruel, and we wouldn't let some tech intern determine the health care for a child suffering from cancer, yet they're getting to decide what research to cut. It's totally upside down.
You're suing the administration over the Doge cuts. Where are you in this process?
So I am in 2 lawsuits, at least. It depends on the day. What we have here are just to set kind of the legal framework. This isn't a president's discretionary spending. These are all acts of Congress, meaning they're laws on the books, just like any other law. On top of that, an appropriation has been made that says here is the money to follow through with this law that we passed. And then the federal government has entered agreements with us, contracts that say we will provide this money for this service, and often the state has already floated the money out there. So this is this administration saying we're not going to keep our word, we're going to break our contract, we're going to ignore a law passed by Congress, and we're going to ignore the appropriation. There is not a legal ground that they can stand on. I used to be an attorney general. And this idea that they're floating, even for, we call them the COVID dollars, but they're really public health dollars to help make sure we are better prepared for any future pandemic. What they are claiming as their cause is pretty laughable in legal terms.
So I'm guessing Elon Musk and the Doge team don't know very much specifically about Kentucky voters.
Nor the federal government.
But members of Congress do, who represent Kentucky. And Congress could stand in the way of Doge. They could stand in the way of what the president is doing on tariffs. Are you speaking with Republican members of Congress that represent the state of Kentucky? Because I would guess the interests you're talking about, they share with you.
We have a real challenge here in that we're supposed to have 3 branches of government that all check.
Hold on. Is it a yes or a no? You're talking to members of Congress in your state?
We're talking to members of Congress every time we see a funding cut. We're making sure that they know about it. And many of them work to help. I'll tell you, to give credit where credit's due, Mitch McConnell's out there saying tariffs are bad and are attacks on our people. Rand Paul's out there saying tariffs are bad and attacks on their people. I'm out there saying tariffs are bad and attacks on our people. So if Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, and I all agree on something, it's probably because it's true.
But that's what I wanted you to get,
Yes.
Is that a model for kind of the rest of the country, right? We talk every day about how divided we are, but what Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell and you are doing collectively is representing your state together, and that, in theory, is government working.
And all we're doing is our job. All right, we take that oath of office to serve our Commonwealth. We also take an oath of office to uphold the U.S. Constitution, and for me, the Kentucky Constitution. If you are allowing a president to ignore a law that you passed as Congress, you are not meeting your oath. You're not doing what you have to for us to have the functional government that our founders created. I mean, do your job. You know, your job isn't to be the best Republican or the best Democrat you can be, but to be the best representative of your people. I'll give you an example. My job's to be the best governor I can be. And so I'm speaking out here today against a number of policies of this administration because they're bad for my people. But if you ask me how FEMA has done responding, especially to our February flooding, it's the best response I've seen. And we've had 14 federally declared disasters since I became governor 5.5 years ago. We've been hit harder than anybody. But if you're going to have credibility to speak out on what this administration is doing wrong, when it does something right, you've got to be willing to admit that too.
So how do you work with this White House? If the president invited you up for a visit, would you go to the White House?
If a president invites you for a visit, you go. That's a respect you ought to show to any president. Now, would I disagree with that president in private or in public? Yes, because again, that's my job. But I can't let the difference in parties or disagreement we had yesterday potentially impact progress that could be made tomorrow. And when I speak out on tariffs or anything else, it's my hope they'll change their mind. And we should want any federal administration to be successful, because if they're successful, it's good for our people. And so I'm being I'm probably just loud by nature, but I'm being this loud because we really need them to rethink this tariff policy that would so harm the people of my state.
You've said the tariff policy is the president and the president alone.
He stood up there with the big poster.
He did. Bourbon is one industry that is unique to Kentucky that I know you care a lot about. The president has made his view on tariffs clear. He has a very strong opinion, but he's open to talk. And he's basically saying, come on down, we can negotiate. Can you see yourself, or have you reached out to this White House on behalf of the bourbon industry?
We've reached out to, not the president directly, but a number of different points in the White House that will talk with us, and talked about how important this is for that industry. Now, our largest industry in Kentucky is aerospace. Most people don't know that about us. And then it's automotive, but 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky, and the other 5% is counterfeit. And none of the world should be deprived of great Kentucky bourbon. But when you look at the actions of this administration, they go beyond what we saw in the first term. Look at Canada. I mean, Canada's been an amazing ally to the United States.
And they love bourbon.
They do. And they have followed us into just about every international conflict we've been in, regardless of probably whether they thought that we were right. And for the president to be kicking Canada and talking about the 51st state or any of that stuff is so disrespectful that they're not just looking at reciprocal tariffs, they're taking American products off the shelf. And it's hard to blame them based on the way that they're being treated. And so all of this wrong tariff approach is not just hurting us economically, but I worry about security and world security. I think about how important our alliances with Europe have been for world security and what it means the way this administration talks about it.
But are all tariffs bad tariffs? Because Kentucky is a state that's been hurt by globalization. And there are a lot of Trump supporters in your state who buy into this idea, short-term pain, long-term gain, even though we haven't heard about what the long-term gain plan would look like. What do you say to those voters? Because they are struggling.
Yeah, the answer is no, not all tariffs are bad, but we're not talking about nuance in the approach of this administration. You know, if somebody's hitting you with a baseball bat, you tell them to stop. You don't say switch to a ruler. And that's what we're seeing. This approach by the administration is the wrong way to approach tariffs. You think about trade policy being complicated and taking an approach that is nuanced and that takes time to implement and is carefully implemented. But we're not seeing any of that from the approach of this administration.
It sounds like from everything that I'm hearing, you try to take the politics out of politics.
Every time we can.
So another big business in your state is Toyota. They've got one of the largest manufacturing plants in the country, and they've specifically expanded their electric vehicle manufacturing. How is it that electric vehicle production has become so politicized, and how do you solve for that in a state where it's really important to you?
It should have never been politicized, and it will hit people who voted for this president the hardest.
Tell us why.
Because we're building the two biggest battery plants on planet Earth. They are Ford and SK On. The smaller one is 0.9 miles from beginning to end. Together, it's a $5.8 billion investment with 5,000 new jobs. Just down the road, AESC is building a $2 billion battery plant with 2,000 jobs. We just announced a new battery storage plant that a company called Canadian Solar is building. You know, what matters most to people who fill those jobs isn't that it's a green job theoretically, it's a green job that helps their family, that puts food on the table. And a lot of people have tried to fight the future and no one's ever won. And electric vehicles are definitely the future. And supporting these factories would fall into everything else the president's talking about. He's talking about reshoring things that are made elsewhere in the United States. We are doing more of that with EV batteries than anything else, yet it's being attacked because of politics. But taking politics out of something is so important. Somehow, pre-K has become political in Kentucky. You know, we have 50% of our kids that show up not ready for kindergarten. We can afford universal pre-K, but it's somehow become this back and forth red and blue battle in Kentucky. Maybe it's that I'm for it, because I am. Every child deserves that good start.
When you think about what worries you the most, is it the DOJ cuts? Is it the tariffs? Is it our approach to immigration right now?
I would say it starts with those potential Medicaid cuts, because what it would mean to so many communities and the health of our people. I think right with that has to be tariffs that are going to devastate small businesses and big businesses alike. We have a company called Martin Rea, which is a Canadian company, and their parts go from Canada to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, to Mexico and back again. So that's almost an exponential tariff on that company that has about 500 jobs in one of our communities. But small businesses that get materials that are so necessary from other parts of the world, it's a huge challenge for them. The DOJ cuts, I'm worried that they're not trying to fix, but to break government. We can all act more efficiently. We can all try to fix something. But laying off 40% of people from a cabinet or an agency isn't fixing it. It's trying to break it.
You didn't mention immigration. Immigration has been a winning issue for the president. He still thinks it will be, despite the fact that maybe these mass deportations are illegal. How do Democrats tackle this? Because it's been a really challenging one and still is today.
So border security is national security. You should be for secure borders regardless of what party you're in. Illegal immigration is illegal, and we do have to enforce our laws. But these individuals are human beings. And the way that they're being treated and the due process that folks aren't getting, shackles on people's legs. I mean, these are children of God regardless of where they're from, and even if they broke the law coming into our country. So the way we go about everything we do ought to support the rule of law, which is not happening here, but also ought to show our humanity to the world. You can do a tough thing, but you can try to do it in a humane way.
Everything I'm hearing from you is sort of rooted in the idea of decency and goodness and family values.
Yeah.
Why is it that family values voters are so difficult for Democrats to peel from Republicans?
Democrats stopped talking about their why a long time ago.
I thought you were saying wives. I'm like,
No,
wow, where are we going here?
But I will talk about Brittany anytime you like. She's.
We can stop talking about our wives. Okay, sorry, back to it, yes.
We talk about the what, and we get into the nuance. We get into subsection A, point I on our policy, but we never talk about why we make the decisions that we do. For me, it's my faith that drives me in just about everything I do. I remember back in my re-election year, I vetoed the nastiest anti-LGBTQ bill that I'd ever seen as governor. And when I explained why I did it, I said, I believe all children are children of God, and I don't want our General Assembly picking on these kids. You know, they're showing them hate. I want them to show that somebody loves them and cares about them. And it's my job to do the tough thing, especially when it's the hardest. And I'll never forget the next day, I'm at an event, and I got a guy walking up to me, and I thought, oh my. But he sticks out his hand and he says, Governor, I'm not sure I agree with what you did, but I know you're doing what you think is right. So if we can get to that why, maybe we can have the grace and the space to have real conversations and maybe argue a little bit less.
All right, I know I'm out of time, but then let me just ask you, you're also taking a different approach than some of your other Democratic colleagues in who you speak to. You spend a lot of time speaking directly to Trump voters, but not sort of right-wing elites. When we look at the governor of California, right? He, like you, has a new podcast out, and he is speaking to the Steve Bannons, the Charlie Kirks. You're not going with it you're taking a different approach. Can you explain?
Well, thank you for the plug for the Andy Bashir podcast. My goal on this kind of goes back to COVID. When there's such scary news that's out there or difficult, stressful news. Right now, the news hits you minute after minute after minute. And people started talking to me about how we would do a daily update where we would work through it, but do it in a calm way to where people felt like they had the information that they needed, but felt refreshed and ready to take on the world at the end of it.
Is it to combat misinformation? Because without that daily update,
yes,
the vacuum of misinformation, especially in states like Kentucky, is huge.
And so we take the topics of the day and we try to have a conversation amongst friends. We have some important guests that come on, but then I have a friend on there, of mine who's a Democrat and a friend who's a Republican. But we all have the same values, and we talk through the challenges that are out there, and I'm hoping it helps everybody else process that too, because this is a tough time on all of our health and our mental health and just the chaos that feels like it's coming out of DC. I wanted to create a space where people could come, learn a little something, but ultimately get that recharge they need to face the day.
Standing in the light. Governor, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Please welcome Michael Maybach, CEO of MasterCard, and Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson, CEO Editor at Semaphore.
Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Maybach from MasterCard for this discussion on access and opportunities. So, Michael, you spent, I believe, 15 years at MasterCard, including considerable time in the Middle East before
right.
being announced as CEO, I think just a few weeks before COVID.
2 weeks before the lockdown started.
Wonderful timing. They didn't tell you this was going to be in your inbox.
Yes, exactly. 4 weeks later, the revenue of the company fell off the cliff.
Yeah. It seems like a long time ago, but obviously you succeeded Ajay Banga, who's also busy this week, now World Bank president. So I'll be interested to hear about whether that's your next move eventually. But you've been central, even before you took the job of CEO, to MasterCard's financial inclusion strategy and to a transformation story. You're turning it from a consumer-centric, so card-centric business to a much more diversified digital payments company, spanning open banking and all sorts of things, which we can get into. But before we do, I want to talk about what you're seeing right now, because MasterCard has this incredible kind of real-time insight into consumer spending.
Right.
At your last earnings, you said the strength of consumer spending was a tailwind. The consumer sentiment surveys we are looking at right now point to something very different. But how are you actually seeing that affecting spending?
Right. So I think it's important for us to look at the consumer. The consumer is exposed to all the news and changes that we all observe, and clearly they are taking it all in and making their decisions. And we have seen in the University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Study that it's affecting consumers' confidence. But it's interesting when you start to look at the headlines on one hand, and when you look at soft data, and I would call a confidence study soft data, and then you look at the hard data, and the hard data is spending data. We have an economics institute at MasterCard. It's a wonderful resource where we look at our own spending data on the MasterCard network, but we look at broader spending across the economy. And this is real-time data, and just picking the month of March, 1.4% increase in consumer spend. So nothing out of the ordinary. So the hard data is not reflecting yet, but it's not reflecting where the consumer is. Now, if you go back a year or so, you go back 1.5 years, and you look at a time of heightened inflation, which affects consumer confidence as much, because you will have to make decisions on discretionary spend versus non-discretionary spend. Are you going to make that trip, yes or no? And the consumer has adjusted to that. So the consumer today is an empowered consumer that will still stick to what they want to do. They still want to make that trip. Do I do 2 trips? Maybe not, or maybe I don't travel that far. But the adjustment to the environment, the consumer has clearly learned. So all of this is transpiring right now, as in we don't see any change at this point. But you look down the road, and we will, as a company, of course, because we have these data sources, continue to monitor. It's the most asked question that I get. And then when I say what I just said, people say there must be something more. But right now, there's not.
So taking that, how are you scenario planning right now?
Right.
What are you actually planning for? Are you taking into account the possibility of a high possibility of a recession? Do you think that's still a very remote possibility right now?
So, when you think about what we do as a company, we facilitate the purchasing of goods and services. On one hand, it's a big part of our business. We also provide a whole range of services that are tied to powerful underlying secular trends that have nothing to do with the economy. For example, cybersecurity solutions. We're one of the largest providers globally. So our scenario planning goes to people will always pay in an up cycle and a down cycle because we have to sustain our digital lives. That's what we power. So our scenario planning isn't one of dark clouds. We start to look at the nuances where we say, this part of the world is going to see more impact than other parts of the world, but we are in 210 countries and territories, so it is a very well-diversified business. So right now, there isn't a scenario where we're saying, I have not used the R word, where this is a dramatic impact on us at least. We're also not the full economy. If you look at the manufacturing sector, that is not generally what we deal with.
Sure.
So that is important to look at as well.
It feels like the digital payments world has exploded. There's just so
in a
much.
positive way, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. What are you doing to differentiate MasterCard right now?
Right. So I was at dinner not too long ago where one of our business partners pulled out a card that is from another brand. And we got into this conversation about differentiation. And we got into this conversation where he's essentially made the point you just made. New business partner, I have to say. And we got into this conversation about the choices that people today have in payments. You can pay with cash, you can pay with checks, you can pay with your wallet, you can pay with stable coins, you can pay with your crypto balances, you can pay any which way you like. And you can pay through a bank, you can have a payment solution directly with your favorite retailer. All of that is open today, so the competitive landscape has literally exploded. How do you differentiate in a world like that? Well, we're not a front-end B2C company. So we're not a Sony or a Walmart. We power the Sonys and Walmarts with our solutions on the back side. So we love the competition. We love the choices that are now on the market. We were the first company that went out to say, cards isn't the answer to everything. Clearly, there's other ways to pay. You come from the UK, faster payments. This is the longest standing real-time payment system, which is something that we power today, because in the end, technology will take us to different places. Consumer expectation will take us to different places. We need to continue to innovate around that.
And do you think MasterCard can win the competition in digital payments? I mean, we just saw Visa take over your credit card deal with Apple, for example. When you go head-to-head?
I'm curious. I have not seen that. I've seen the headline. But
okay.
I have not seen it.
Is this happening or not?
So there was a headline in the Wall Street Journal that said that was covering this particular topic, and then it stopped at a certain point. So it has not happened.
Okay, all right. Well, but more broadly speaking,
yes.
Do you think with all of these newer players in the market, MasterCard can win this competition?
So imagine our management table. So what do we talk about? This is a key question. But our focus isn't really so much on the strategy of competition. We have said our opportunity is in providing the widest range of consumer payment solutions, of services and payment solutions for small businesses and for corporates. And then we have a set of payment agnostic solutions or services that deal with cybersecurity, with data insights, and so forth. It's a very simple strategy. And we've been consistent with the strategy now for 5 years, and that's where the focus is. And we power the rest of the ecosystem. So, you mentioned another company right now. A lot of people compare and say it's the same. Well, the geographic footprint isn't the same. The services proposition isn't the same. So one has to really go into the depth, which I will avoid right now, but we do feel very well positioned. It really comes down to one thing. What is my customer's problem? So take a large retailer. What is their one thing that they want? They don't want a checkout experience. Because who wants checkout? Who wants to stand on a line? Or who wants to have a complicated checkout page on their web page? So making that as simple as possible and making my customer's problem our problem, see how do we do away with that. What is the answer to this particular question was it's biometrics. You open your phone, if that can work on a browser, if that can work on your phone, if that can work for any payment you make, wouldn't that be wonderful? We created that standard, we pushed that out, and standard setting and industry leading, that's how you set yourself apart from the rest.
I mean, this clearly a sort of technology challenge and probably has been for the 60 years of MasterCard's existence, but how are you specifically leveraging AI right now, and where are you seeing the biggest returns on that investment?
We have 3 minutes left. We did not come to AI yet, so I'm surprised. This was probably the longest time that I've been in any such conversation. So artificial intelligence, so we have 160 billion transactions run through our system every year. And machine learning and traditional AI and rules-based AI was how we've done that. It's the only way to deal with that, so that your transaction only goes through if it should, and it doesn't go through if it shouldn't. What we're now doing is we're leveraging generative AI. And then you say, well, why does this even make any sense? So take the following scenario. It's the weekend, and your partner has said, why don't we go and travel XYZ? To XYZ destination, you say, well, how many miles do I have for this hotel, in my hotel account, my airline account? What is the latest information on what is a cool destination, et cetera? So all of these things that you go through manually. In a world of agentic commerce, you have a smart agent that knows all your preferences and all of your balances and all of that, and will book this thing in 2 minutes. We enable travel. We enable commerce. And we have a lot of data, not personalized data, I should add, but data on, through loyalty partnerships that we have with our customers, where people give the consent to put their miles information in, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this can be put together, and then the agent goes all the way through to the booking, all the way through to the payment. The world isn't designed around this today, but you can see a world where you have 5, 6 agents in your life that do this for you, and everybody else has 5, 6 agents in your life, and then you start to see how these agents do business with each other.
So how do you need to work with the creators of those agents to make MasterCard the beneficiary?
In the end, because if everybody does their own thing, that will not work. So interoperability of all of these agents coming together to make such a transaction simple and smart and safe, and in a way trustworthy, where it's clear how data privacy is dealt with and so forth. Those are the kind of things we do today, and that we have now done in non-cards payments, and then we will do for agentic commerce going forward. So this is a very exciting point in time to say payments can be smarter, they can be faster. Agentic commerce. My next marketing approach could be to market to an agent, a commerce agent. So that is where our thinking is going as we look ahead.
If you take a snapshot right now, where has AI saved you the most money or made a process most?
On the cybersecurity side, very clear. Fraud management today, we have invested over the since 2018, we've invested $11 billion in keeping our own 4 walls safe and putting out safety and security products for our customers. We have now, through a whole range of solutions, put out a goal to save $120 billion in fraud by 2030. So that is a lot of saving for the industry, for our customers, for consumers. And yet again, for that, we use generative AI. Today, you can have a situation where somebody steals your card data. It's somewhere sold on the dark web. We scan the dark web, and we get this information in real time, 1 trillion data points in real time, and we flag it to the bank, says this card data has been exposed somewhere, please stop this customer from using it and issue a new card.
I'm going to end on a rather different payments technology question.
Right.
The president is phasing out the federal government's use of paper checks. Yes. Has your industry finally defeated its nemesis?
We have been on it for a long time. When the executive order about the modernization of payments came out, we were like cheering. This is exactly what is needed. This is dated industry, data technology, and now having the safety and security of digital payments, and that can reach anybody. Anybody who has a debit card in the United States can now get any kind of support payment or make tax payments.
It only took MasterCard 60 years
it's a good
to beat
step away.
the check. But
there you go.
Thank you, Michael.
That should not be the headline, but there you go. Thank you.
And thank you very
much.
Great
thank you.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back to you.
Please welcome James Mwangi, CEO and Equity Group Holdings Limited, Leslie Mastorp, CEO of British International Investment, and Alexis Aguajiram, Managing Editor, Semaphore Africa.
Well, good afternoon, welcome. And welcome to you, James and Leslie. I think the name of this panel says it all in terms of filling the void. So I wanted to start with that. That's the obvious question. Who or what, James, do you think will fill the void that's been left by USAID?
I see this as a void of financing development and leadership in inclusion. And I see the best positioned people to fill this development gap and financing is the private sector. Mm-hmm. The private sector has enormous resources. It has worked alongside the DFID, whether it's the philanthropists, whether it's civil society, whether it's corporations. So together, they should be able to fill that gap.
I mean, this is a huge gap. You think that they can do it between them?
I think we'll talk of 85 billion proportionate to the capital of the private sector. Mm-hmm. It requires maybe a 2% contribution by the private sector. 2% will overwhelm the gap that we have in financing.
And then Leslie, so I want to put that to you. Specifically, I mean, I wonder, how do you go about unlocking the capital? Because this is what you do as a DFI.
No. I think, Alexis, my starting point would be that the development finance world have been ripe for reinvention, ripe for change and to refresh our tools of the trade. So this moment is a moment of opportunity. In 1944, the World Bank was formed, the IMF was formed, and it laid the basis for how the development model works, which essentially is leveraging money from the capital markets. We use the high creditworthiness of the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, European Investment Bank. Development finance institutions are the only AAA remaining institutions in the world of finance, which means we have a low cost of capital, and through that, we're able to finance infrastructure in the developed world. Right now, there's a need for greater innovation. We have to go back to the drawing boards. The world has evolved to the point where we've got to refresh our toolkits. So James is correct in saying that the private sector is at the center of it. So in short, your question of how it will be done, we need to be much more catalytic. Instead of us as BII, for example, we deploy about $2.2 billion, as we did last year, into the developing world of Africa and Asia. We want to do that in a much more catalytic fashion. So every transaction we finance, we need to mobilize third-party money from pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, from the institutional investor community.
And is that what you mean? Can you just break down a bit more what you mean by catalytic?
Yeah. So we, as BII, our theory of change is investing in companies for development impact. We have a portfolio of over 1,500 companies throughout the world. We employ over 1 million people. We invest in companies that are both financially sustainable as well as deliver development impact. So what we are now saying, instead of us originating these transactions, we'll originate it in such a way that we will use our capital in ways that can improve the risk-return profile of some of these projects so that it reaches the threshold that is acceptable for these commercial institutions. Because many of the jurisdictions in which we operate, countries in Africa, fragile and frontier markets like Sierra Leone, like the DRC, where we have investments, you will never find Prudential or Allianz or BlackRock or Brookfield investing in those. However, there are many markets, emerging markets, that have much more stable characteristics. Some of the middle-income countries, for example, where we can invest and bring those investors alongside us and generate sufficient returns that those institutions would be comfortable with. Ordinarily, they would not enter some of these deals, but we will do it in such a way that we can use more blended finance structures to use our capital in such a way that it can improve the risk return.
And James, as a banker that operates on the ground, what would you like to see? What do you think can affect change?
I think there are a couple of things that will catalyze the private sector coming in to fill the vacuum. The first one is standards. We need now to establish what are the standards of investment. We're talking of replacing an economic order that has been there for 100 years with governance structures and institutions. The question is, will the markets, the capital markets, replace those structures? And it's then, if that will be the case, we need to see how capital markets can democratize access such that this new order gives everybody an opportunity to play into the game. And that is really the issue. The standards we are talking about is transparency, is openness, it's known standards so that everybody can play by the rules.
But this is something that would have to happen very quickly, isn't it? Because, I mean, the pace of change, the volatility that we're seeing, I mean, specifically, what would have to happen to change those standards?
I think markets respond very quickly to opportunities. Whenever there is an opportunity, markets respond quickly. Capital moves with speed because capital is very informed of market opportunities, and so it looks at the opportunities. Here is an opportunity to fill this opportunity because good opportunities are scarce. So not much needs to happen. It's just the markets. If there's an opportunity to rethink asset classes, and we see, for instance, some of these development opportunities being classified into an asset class so that people can access, people can evaluate, then it becomes easier for money to flow very quickly.
New asset classes, any thoughts on that?
I think that both of us, James, has been a pioneer on the African continent. I've worked for most of my career on the African continent. Before I come to new asset classes, just want to make the point that we are both, strongly optimistic about the possibilities to adopt new technology, innovation, AI-powered tools for Africa to leapfrog the developmental challenges that we face. In order to do that, we need to look at it through that lens of developing new asset classes, finding ways to create liquid asset classes that the capital markets players can participate in. We will not be able to transform the economic landscape of Africa through individual transactions with all of our institutions, right? We have to do it at a systemic level. And the only way to do that is to embrace the power of new technology. So in agriculture, in health, in every domain where there's agro-processing, there is we're entering a new era when it comes to artificial intelligence. So we are really very excited about the potential that it holds for the African continent. Exactly like digitization have transformed banking, mobile telephony has completely transformed the world of communications. We believe we're at such a sort of transcendental, sort of transitional moment right now.
But if I may add, I think the biggest opportunity would be if there is convergence to breaded finance, such that market capital looking for a return, bottom profit, works together with the philanthropic capital, looking for impact. If the two worked together, then we will be able to not only catalyze, but also de-risk and capacitate. And that will almost ensure nobody is left behind. So that ability for all classes of capital to work together and provide the market with one solution of breaded finance because of the asset class we are talking about, it will be very impactful.
I'm struck by that, and also what Leslie was saying about technology. I know both of you, technology has played a big part in your careers. James, I know with you, that's a way for you to democratize the banking sector. Leslie, just on that point you made about AI, in terms of playing devil's advocate, the counter-argument would be that at the moment it looks like Africa, across the continent, there's a disadvantage when it comes to AI because it's power hungry, and you have 600 million people in Africa who don't have access to regular, constant electricity, constant power, let alone meeting the needs of, say, data centers that you need. There isn't the underlying infrastructure in place. So how do you think the continent can overcome that to harness the power of AI in the way that you've described?
I mean, in the last, already for some time, I'd say probably for the last decade, but more so today, energy and energy access, or energy poverty, is at the heart of, or the most critical lever that will transform the economic landscape in Africa. Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, launched an initiative called M300, which is aimed at by 2030, which is around the corner, by the way, to electrify 300 million people, 300 million homes on the African continent. A very ambitious idea. There's a series of strategies. We don't have time to talk about it now, but that is the ambition. I was very encouraged by the statement by Scott Bessent this morning, identifying power and energy access as the #1 developmental priority for the developing world. So there's a convergence in thinking. So when it comes to the African continent, and by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the numbers, 80% of the people in the world without electricity reside on the African continent. So if we are unable to solve that problem, the demographic numbers, if we don't create 600-700 million jobs for young people in Africa over the next 2 decades, we are doomed, because Africa will be the size of China and India combined in the next 25 years. So coming back to your question around energy, data centers, and so on, the cost of renewable energy today makes it possible for Africa to really become the hub of green energy, and for us to be able to transport. I mean, we already have some of the biggest solar parks in the world, in Egypt, for example. We should be able to build, based on the current projections, make Africa the hub of green energy, and transform whether it's healthcare, education, and so on.
And I just want to actually piggyback on what you said about demographics, because I think that's the underlying issue in so many of these conversations is demographics. And as we know, Africa is the youngest continent. Now, there's an opportunity there, but there's also a danger, because if there aren't enough jobs, you alluded to that, then it causes problems, political instability. So, I mean, James, what do you think? How can that situation be transformed? Because so much of this, in terms of filling the void, is about addressing the needs of those people.
Markets quickly reorganize themselves. By 2050, Africa will have over 42% of all the youthful population. It will have 33% of the world labor force and 26% of the consumers of the world. And that will be what will be the force of reorganizing the marketplace, because that will contribute to 2 major factors, the consumer and the labor. And as Leslie said, Africa has 62% of undeveloped renewable energy. So the supply side is ready to be driven by the market as market. So if you combine that with 65% of all arable and utilized land being in Africa for agricultural purposes, if you then combine that with the critical strategic minerals that particularly that will leapfrog the energy transition, then Africa is very well positioned to reorganize the global market, the marketplace.
And in this conversation so far, there's been a lot of optimism. We've spoken about Africa, and we've spoken very much about the role of the private sector on the continent. We haven't spoken about outside actors, the alternatives to the US. I mean, what this has exposed is the extent to which African economies have relied on money that came from the US. So now that's being withdrawn. Who fills it? What about China, for example, or anyone else? What do you think, Leslie?
Look, I mean, I think the first point to make is that there's a general acknowledgement and acceptance today by most policymakers throughout the African continent that there has been a degree of what you can broadly call aid dependency. So the end of aid dependency is a positive development for Africa, where, in some countries in Africa, 35% of the health budgets was dependent on USAID and others. Now, to keep your people healthy, to treat people with HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis and other diseases, etc., and to be relying on outside resources for that was surely unsustainable. We have to move from the basic foundational point that ultimately economic development can only be done by national governments, countries taking ownership of their own economic development futures. International cooperation can only play a complementary role. So the first point is that although it's been dramatic in the way that the aid infrastructure has been dismantled, it is a wake-up call because, it's 80 years actually after Bretton Woods and 80 years since the World Bank has been in existence. About, I think USAID was formed in 1962 by John F. Kennedy, so they've existed for over 50 years. And abruptly it has ended. So I think for the last 5 decades, there's been a sort of lackadaisical approach to just accepting that there's these inflows, right? African countries now recognize that they have to develop their own people, their skills, and build their own institutions and own their own economic futures.
So in short, just to be clear, in answer to the question I asked about China, you're saying don't look overseas.
Or with respect to China and every other major economic power, I don't think the African heads of state and the people that we interact with within senior people in government look at this moment through the lens of, we need to find another USAID elsewhere. Ownership of their own economic futures is the starting point. China is already a significant investor on the African continent, #1 trading partner to most of Africa, but there are also other significant actors from the Middle East, for example, in Africa. There are a number of European players that are active in Africa. So there's not a binary sort of US versus China domain. I think it's very simplistic often where, because the #1 and #2 economy in the world sort of draw the most attention or suck all the oxygen. We in Africa do not look at it through that lens. The world is, multipolar, and we have to look at a constellation of players when we redesign the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, I appreciate it. We could talk all day, but I think that's it for us. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
James, thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Frank McCourt, founder of Project Liberty, and Max Tawney, media editor at Semaphore.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for doing this. We were chatting beforehand backstage, and you were telling me that it's been a year since you went public with your bid to buy TikTok. Obviously, this is something that people have read a lot about, seen a lot about, are following the developments. Maybe some TikTok users in the room had some disruptions earlier this year. You said that you were feeling better about the bid today than you were then, and that there's been a lot of progress made. Why are you feeling that way?
Well, for two reasons. Number one, I think it's clear that if TikTok is going to be sold, it's going to be sold in compliance with the legislation. There's not going to be some licensing of the algorithm or any kind of entanglement with the Chinese technology. And as far as we know, we're the only bidder that actually would meet the criteria laid out in the legislation. And the second reason I'm feeling great about it is that we've already won in by many measures, because we now have a pipeline of use cases that collectively have over 1.5 billion users that have made inquiries about this new upgraded internet and how it would work. I mean, an internet, in other words, where individuals own and control their data and their identity and their relationships.
Right.
So,
this bid is part of Project Liberty, which is your view for a larger, for a very different decentralized internet.
yeah, exactly. I think that's a really important a point to make here. Project Liberty is was not established to buy TikTok per se. Project Liberty is about re-engineering, redesigning the internet so that we all are in charge of ourselves. We own ourselves again, have agency, and as I said, control and own our identity and our data. The TikTok bid was serendipitous. It was, okay, here's this piece of legislation. This TikTok is going to either be shut down or divested or sold, and wow, we have technology that we've built now from the ground up over the last 5 years that is a clean American, made in America stack that can onboard the 170 million users in their data, meet the national security criteria, and catalyze this new internet.
And part of this, I'm not sure if you just mentioned this or you've mentioned it, you've talked about it a lot, is this idea that some of the other bidders would not be willing to would back away from buying TikTok if they did not get access to the algorithm or if the algorithm wasn't part of the deal. You've said the algorithm isn't important to us, we would still buy it anyway, which is surprising to some people and a little bit confusing to the layperson. What is the value of TikTok without that very powerful algorithm that is just feeding me cooking videos and NBA dunks and snowboarding and whatever other content is coming across my very male feed?
Yeah, well, the number we've put on US TikTok with the user base, with the data, and without the algorithm is $20 billion. We think that's a very accurate number for what it's worth, and that's what's supported by our modeling. Look, the TikTok is not going to be sold with the algorithm. China has made that crystal clear. And remember, ByteDance is not a normal company. The golden share is owned by China, and they have the last say as to if it's sold and to whom. So, and they've made it clear that none of their technology, the algorithm specifically, is national IP. On the other hand, the legislation that requires a shutdown or sale has made it clear that there needs to be 100% disentanglement of, for any buyer must disentangle from the Chinese technology, because that's where the threat lies. The reason why Congress passed this legislation and did it in such a bipartisan way is they were alarmed when they found out not just that China had information on 170 million Americans, but that China was using it actively to manipulate what 170 million Americans were thinking.
Mm-hmm. So I guess from a user perspective, what I'm curious about is, would you be afraid, or, I mean, I would, if I was in your position, I think I would feel a little bit nervous about the idea of, okay, we've won this bid, we've got TikTok, that's great, but the algorithm is now gone. What is the value for users if the algorithm is gone, and are you afraid that users, once they logged into their feeds, saw it wasn't feeding them the same kind of stuff that they're used to seeing, that they would?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not going to happen like turning on or off the lights here in this room. There's a transition period, so it's going to be a year, 8 to 18 months of transition from the current version of TikTok to the new version of TikTok. But secondly, and more importantly, we need to demystify the algorithm a little bit. Yes, TikTok has a powerful algorithm. It's designed actually to specifically addict, engage, and scrape people's data, right? And as a propaganda tool, then to feed those people who are addicted information that is with pro-Chinese sentiment. So we're not looking to replicate that algorithm. That's not an algorithm that should be replicated, and that's why the legislation was passed in the first instance. Lastly, big data, small algorithm will beat big algorithm, small data any day. So there are lots of people, and we have many of them in our employ, that are experts at creating algorithms. And by the way, the world is moving into a place where we'll be curating our own algorithms. You know, we now have an app store. Soon there'll be an algorithm store. You'll be picking and choosing algorithms that combined create the feed that you want. So this is the power of the technology as it's advancing. The fundamental point of Project Liberty is not that the tech is bad or the tech shouldn't advance or the internet isn't wonderful. The fundamental point is that we should each own and control our data, because our data is our personhood. It is us in the digital age. We should own ourselves. We should permission the use of our data rather than being surveilled. We should go on the internet and signal what we're interested in rather than being targeted. So that's at the core of the project. Now let's fix the tech so it's in harmony with those principles.
So I want to come back to that in a second, because it's super interesting, and it's obviously key to TikTok as kind of a vehicle for this vision. But you have said publicly that you've been in discussions with the White House. Your bid has been named among several others. You've been a bit more public about it than some of the others, like Amazon was one of the last ones that was reported. Take us inside what the current state of play is like for TikTok. Trump has said that he wants to delay it again. When was the last time that you spoke with the White House, and what's the sense you get about what the latest is?
My sense is right now is that the TikTok issue, just amongst the array of issues that are occupying people's time and attention, and in particular the White House's attention, is lower down.
It's declined a little bit recently.
At the moment. That number one. Number two, what is becoming clearer is that any bid or any consortium, any buyer group that thinks they're going to license the algorithm or somehow work around the legislation, I think that ship has sailed. Because that was really what was happening before, was kind of, can we kind of keep TikTok alive and meet the somehow meet the letter of the legislation, but not the spirit.
And are you kind of referring to the Oracle, bid, which is there's some sort of level of oversight? It's not totally sold completely. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, it's a Project Texas 2.0 kind of version, right? Which is, let's see if we can somehow work around this problem. And there is no workaround. And the legislation is, not only is the legislation amply clear, but what's fascinating to me is that the Supreme Court decision is even more explicit in what is actually required to fulfill that criteria. So it's if there's a transaction, and that's a big if, because China may just decide to shut it down. If there's a transaction, it's going to have to be to a buyer that complies with that law, which means a buyer that can actually is interested in buying it and onboarding the user base and the data on a clean stack that doesn't require any of the Chinese technology.
So, do you think that the trade war and this kind of ongoing trade dispute with China has made an acquisition of TikTok less likely?
Unclear to me. I think that I read a lot at the expiration of the 75 days that it was the trade war that was messing up a deal with TikTok. But in fact, what the impediments to a TikTok deal at the time, other than what I've just alluded to, which is the lack of compliance with the law, is that Congress, Republican members of Congress, stood up and said, well, wait a second, this is not complying, and we're going to enforce the law. And secondly, China actually perked up and said, there's no deal here without China, without China explicitly signing off on it. And I'm not sure there was a full appreciation of that either, that this is not just a normal commercial deal, that we've made thousands of thousands of in our lifetime as businesses. You're making deals all the time in a commercial setting. This is not a typical commercial setting.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of return to the question, have you heard from the White House at all about this in recent days, or you said it's fallen down on their list of priorities?
Yeah, that's kind of code for not a lot of conversation since the 75 days expired.
Sure. To return to something else that you were talking about, you mentioned, we talked about Project Liberty, but it's part of this decentralized social networking protocol, and that's something that you're incredibly focused on, and you've made it to your mission to make a safer, healthier online ecosystem in conversation. I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I really want you to kind of explain a little bit to the audience about what that is, because it still makes my head spin a little bit. You explained it at a lunch in front of a lot of very important and smart reporters, including myself, some of whom kind of understood it and some didn't. But if you could elaborate a little bit on what that is.
Think of it as in two parts. Think of it as one part of it being we have a certain set of rights and principles that guide us in this country, based on a set of freedoms and liberties and human rights. And data should be one of those human rights. It's what provides us agency and control and sovereignty in our lives. So there is that element of the common good aspect of the project. But there's also an element here of massive amount of economic value is going to be created. The internet is going to change. It's not going to look, I don't have to tell any of you about what the harms are of the current internet, whether it's polarization or mis and disinformation or harms to kids and so forth. Any parent here with young kids is having this conversation at the dinner table about social media. This is not like, I'm not here to deliver the news. The zeitgeist is changing. The internet's going to change. There's going to be opportunity with that change. For me, this is very much deja vu. We started a telecom company in 1993 called RCN. It was when the World Wide Web was nascent, right? It was 89. We could see the world changing. You could see that with the internet coming and eventually everybody being connected, it was going to cause massive change. And it could be good change. It could empower people. And so we raised a lot of money. We put fiber optics in every big city in America. The company was called RCN. And we took on the baby bells. Why? They were all on copper wire. High-speed internet required fiber optics. And it was interesting to us that when people came to sign up, many would not sign up to, even though we were the first in the world to bundle one provider, all your service, phone, cable, and high-speed internet. Why? Because they wanted their phone number, and we couldn't give them their phone number. Because up until 1996, the 7 baby bells said, we own the phone number. And by the way, you couldn't talk. Well, if you had one provider, and I lived in New England at the time, I couldn't talk to someone in Florida or California. Those were separate, those are different baby bells.
Yeah.
Okay? In 1996, phone numbers became portable, and the telecoms became interoperable. So you could pick up the phone and call anybody else. It was your number, you had the power, you were not a product, you were a customer, and you could decide which telecom to use. Think of your social graph, your data, as your modern day phone number. It should be yours and portable. Think of the apps as a modern day telcos. They should be interoperable. You shouldn't have to be on Instagram to talk to someone on Instagram. That's like saying, in today's language, oh, I'm on AT&T. Are you on AT&T?
I'm not.
So our phone can work?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on Verizon, we can't talk? Oh, really? It's obviously a much better telecom system when you're in Verizon and I'm on AT&T and we can talk, right?
Yeah.
It opens up possibilities. It's a network effect. The same thing will happen with the internet. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, Frank, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about your TikTok bid, and we'll be following that very closely.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Frank. Really appreciate it. I think we're going off this one.
Please welcome Anjani Mehta, General Partner with A16Z, and Reed Albergati, Technology Editor, Semaphore.
Hello. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So Anj, you're on the board of Mistral and some other European AI companies, and so you have this global view on the AI explosion. If you look back at the internet, right, it was a very American technology. It was American export. We sent, even the applications from Windows to Facebook to Google overseas. It looks different with AI, right? Why is that? Why is AI not necessarily going to go that route?
Well, one, because we have the lessons from the first round. There was a moment when we were fighting this bill in California last year called SB 1047, which was a terrible bill, and I'm happy to go into details for why it would have been chilling for open source AI innovation in this country. When I was sitting across from a policymaker and I said, we cared so much about free speech with the internet. And we had all these carve-outs, right, like Section 230 and so on. And he said, yeah, we fucked it up. We're not going to let you do that this time. I was like, okay, there's a completely different set of assumptions about how technology should be regulated. And technologists, scientists, and researchers who were involved, systems thinkers who were involved in the founding days of the internet, designed it to have free speech protections as a feature, not a bug. And we regulated in America, we regulated misuses of the internet, not the technology itself. And that turned out to be extraordinarily valuable and helped America become this pinnacle of modern technical innovation. Not a lot of other countries adopted that stance. And counterintuitively, there were a whole bunch of policymakers who actually thought that we got that wrong. And as I dug deeper into why, it's because the analogy of social media to AI models in particular was the wrong framing. Because AI models aren't like social media, right? Social media gives individual users the ability to amplify their intentions, whereas models don't have agency or intentions. They're just math. It's literally matrix math that you're running on large pieces of data. And so when I sat down with the policymakers and started on trying to ask, what's the assumption that's leading you to believe that models should be regulated the same way as social media? I started to realize that there were some basic principles that were just not well understood. And that led to this whole realization of the idea of AI becoming cultural infrastructure and mattering to every individual nation much more than social media ended up being. The key mistake, I guess, or the thing that's difficult for people to realize early on is that AI models aren't just computing infrastructure. The models often get talked about as in the same vein as the internet or storage, networking, compute, or electricity for that matter, right? It's become a type of critical national infrastructure, and a lot of regulators want to regulate it that way. But what's different about models, it is like electricity in that it's this general purpose technology that accelerates all progress across a bunch of different pillars of society. But it's not like electricity in this important way in that it's cultural infrastructure. It's trained on data. And the values that that data has, the biases that that data has, the various different shapes of cultural, language, norms, et cetera, encoded in that training data, then affects what the models say and don't say.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so this is really, it's an interesting concept. So obviously, governments are going to play a big role in this, as you sort of alluded to. Let's talk about U.S. policy for a second. So your bosses, Mark and Ben, both came out early on as in the election as sort of big Trump supporters, right? Because it was going to, partly because of all this AI, but it was going to help the tech industry writ large, especially startups. We're 100 days in now. Is there anything surprised you about how things have gone so far?
Absolutely, yeah. I think everybody should be surprised every single day at this point. But I think one of the things that's been most notable in both the AI space as well as the geopolitical space is just how sovereignty has become front and center for everybody, right? If you look back at one of the major kind of events that happens in the AI infrastructure space is an annual summit of different countries that meet of different leaders, both from the scientific and the business community and the policy community, and talk about how to manage the development of AI. And the first 2 years it happened, once in Seoul and the second in Oxford, the tone was very much pessimism about the risks of AI. And then everything changed earlier this year when DeepSeek came out. Because the message was loud and clear, right? If you guys in the West are going to slow yourselves down, go for it. But we sure as hell aren't slowing ourselves down. We're going to train the best models. We're going to open source them from China. And you're welcome. We'd love for you guys to also do the same. But if we're doing this with or without you. And that changed the dynamics completely. So when the Paris AI Summit happened a few weeks later, the tone was entirely about optimism and acceleration. It was clear then that the audience had realized that AI models were a critical piece of national infrastructure that other countries were not waiting around to try and debate about whether this should be accelerated or not.
Do you think, though, that, I mean, you talk about this race, this technology race with China. I mean, first of all, are these new policies in the administration helping the US win that race? And is it even possible to win if you have the open source models that sort of go across the world almost immediately?
So, I mean, I start from the position that we must win. We don't have a choice. If you believe that AI is as transformative as electricity, but it has these cultural norms embedded in them, it's cultural infrastructure, then it becomes very clear. Are you going to outsource your most critical national infrastructure to somebody else's culture, or do you want ownership of yours? Right? Winning or losing is not an option. We must win. Then if you ask, okay, how do we win? The answer is very simple. Just like with every major technology before, if you've got the best technology in the world, the rest of the world will use yours. Right? We exported the best networking technology, the best cryptography, the best compute storage. I mean, this is why 1 billion people in India still use WhatsApp. Mm-hmm. That was invented in Silicon Valley. Now, China, we can talk about why that evolved as a different internet, but it's arguable that most of China's internet actually was tech transfer from Silicon Valley and from parts of the American ecosystem as well. And so that's how we win. We build the best, we ship it, we export it to everybody else, and then we show the rest of the world why they should build on our stack.
It's interesting. I want to hit on the application layer for a second. So we have ChatGPT, which it's very different than like the infrastructure layer, right? So it's become a big consumer product. They seem to have almost like won that, and that can be sort of a winner-take-all global product in a sense, right? Where it has been in the past. But what do you think? Why do you think ChatGPT? You were an investor in Anthropic, right? Which was founded by a bunch of people who actually worked on the GPT-3 and those products at OpenAI. How did OpenAI win that? How did they beat Anthropic?
I'm not sure the race has ended yet.
Well, how did they beat them to market?
I think what OpenAI decided to do very decisively in January of 2023, which was roughly 60 days after ChatGPT came out. Actually, a quick show of hands. How many people here used ChatGPT in 2022? Okay, wow, so about 5%. And how many people used it in 2023? Okay, so basically everybody else. So what happened is, what changed between when ChatGPT came out in December 2022 as a research preview, as a side project of a couple of people at OpenAI, and 2023 is that OpenAI realized that this was a new consumer product category. Mm-hmm. That this wasn't just a research experiment anymore. But if you remember, up until then, OpenAI's business model was to be an API provider. They'd had GPT-3 as an API for about 2 years before that. Mm-hmm. But ChatGPT was the moment when they realized these models are so good at being general purpose tools for all kinds of use cases they hadn't even imagined, that I think the leadership there had the foresight to say, just let it rip. And they I think, some estimates are that they spent about $200 million in giving away free inference. That consumer distribution, allowing everybody to try it out and not rate limiting it, was a very deliberate, I think, very strategic decision.
But Anthropic could have done that too. I mean, they could have released.
Well, Anthropic could have. They had trained a ChatGPT-like model before ChatGPT came out. It was an internal friends and family model. I remember using it. But they decided that the world wasn't ready from a safety perspective. And look, this was one of the founding values that Anthropic had. The team, Dario, who was leading research at OpenAI and led the GPT-3 work, and the core GPT-3 team felt that a core problem with these models, even though they were so powerful, was that they were black boxes. To this day, we don't actually know how generative models actually think, why they say what they do, because they're trained on data. They learn patterns on the data, and then you can kind of prompt them, you can talk them, and you can kind of coax them to say things, but we still don't know why they do the things they do. And so their belief was the answer to that would be a form of almost treating this like a biological problem, where we had to we knew this, the same way we know why our brains, actually we know how our brains don't work, but we actually don't still know how human thought actually works. And so they treated these models like the human brain and said, what we've got to do is find a way to scan them, build an X-ray, and then actually figure out why these things work the way they do. And that's what's going to make them reliable and usable in the most mission-critical contexts in the world, like defense and healthcare and financial services.
But as an investor, though, do you think that was the right decision? Like, did you tell, hey, this is a great product, you should put it out there?
We had a lot of debates. I will say I was certainly on the side of wanting to release it to the world. Yeah. And they made a very contrarian decision, even though it was an extraordinary model before ChatGPT came out, to say, no, the world isn't ready. And I think given the information they had at that time, it was a very reasonable one, because compared to then, what we have now is we do have much more visibility into how to measure these models. There's this whole field called evaluation. There's a really popular eval platform called LM Arena, which is now the primary way people measure the capability of these AI models. If we'd had these measurement tools back then, I think we could have had an empirical debate about whether the model was safe or not with some metrics, but because we didn't, it came down to values.
In 30 seconds, what are the bets that haven't been sort of decided yet in investing in AI?
Oh, the big one is sovereign infrastructure, right? Is who controls your AI? Today, most of the world's AI is controlled by the people who run the infrastructure for your models. And the vast majority of users every day use closed source models. I think where we're headed, a year or 2 years from now, is every country is going to want to run their own sovereign infrastructure so they control their AI.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We're out of time, but thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Please welcome Roham Gharia-Ghozlu, CEO of Dapper Labs, and Max Tawney, media editor at Semaphore.
Roham, thank you so much for doing this. You're the CEO, as the voice of God said, you're the CEO of Dapper Labs, which is the creator of some other kind of recognizable brands. You've got NBA Top Shot, which is, of course, this NFT kind of digital collectibles of insane moments and maybe some even mundane moments, from the NBA. You've got CryptoKitties and several other gaming and Web3 companies, platforms. I'm curious, if we could just take a step back, what do you think it means to own a digital collectible?
Well, I think our company was based around the thesis that there's a lot more you can do with crypto than just currencies. And when you're talking about digital collectible ownership, I would abstract it out. We're talking about digital ownership. We're talking about digital identity. You're talking about control in digital systems. I think that's fundamentally where it sort of zooms out to. And it starts by fans wanting to live, everyone's living their life more digitally, whether it's on Instagram and TikTok, Fortnite, Roblox, they're living their lives more digitally. And sports fans in particular want to connect with their sport through ownership. It's been part of Fandom since the very beginning of sports. And in fact, expressing identity through ownership has been part of humanity since the very beginning of collecting seashells on the beach and kind of stringing them together into a necklace. And I think that's what it's about. The reason we created this company is we think digital identity should be expressed in open environments, not in sort of closed social networks or closed systems. And in an AI-based world, that's even more important because you have everybody can become a creator. And when it comes to a creator or our partners like the NBA, the NFL, or Disney, they recognize that in an open system, they're the ones in control. They have a direct relationship with their fans. Their fans buy the stuff from them. They buy it from us as a manufacturer the same way they can buy a jersey from a store. But the asset itself then belongs to the fan. And versus in sort of the legacy digital systems, you buy something digital inside Fortnite, it's going to stay in Fortnite forever. The brand is, the creator is disaggregated from their community, as many people realize when they get deplatformed off Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. And so those fundamental building blocks of NBA Top Shot and all our other products, it's just it's authenticity, provenance, digital community, connecting people, but in open ways that are auditable, trackable, possible to build on by other developers, and for a creator or a brand, way that they can trust it, and make sure that they can always get their economics from it. That's very important, rather than kind of these closed digital systems. So I kind of bring it all the way back to that. But for our fans, it's just they're living their lives digitally. They just want to have the same fun as ripping packs, trading with their friends, completing sets, expressing their fandom. They do that stuff in the physical world. They just want to do it in a place where they're spending most of their time.
I'm really curious, I remember paying a lot of attention to this during the pandemic, in 2021. It really seemed like if you were an NBA fan, this was something that was very much, very visible to you. A lot of the most famous, the best NBA players were on there. They were collecting Top Shots themselves. They were, Kevin Durant became one of your investors. There were, people were, they were trying to trading, like even NBA fans, or players like Tyrese Halliburton were trading, some of these moments, which is pretty cool and was pretty cool to kind of witness, and kind of watch kind of play out across the platform. But I'm really curious what has changed since then, because I feel like there was a big moment, and at some point it seemed like when people were indoors more. Now it seems like some of that energy has moved to other places, but I'm curious what's changed.
Well, if you think about it, the whole category that the product is based on was born at that exact same time. This category is 5 years old. And when it comes to, you mentioned digital collectibles, I just think of it as digital trading cards. That's the product we're building. And fans collect things physically. They want to collect things digitally. They connect with each other more digitally today than they do physically. But the product we had built back then, there's really only 2 things you could do on NBA Top Shot in 2021. Buy and sell. That's it. It was a very simple product, but it kind of, the people that loved it, the people that engaged with it the most and drove some crazy high numbers were a lot of those early adopters. They wanted that speculative fun, to your point, where people stuck indoors. But over the last 3 years, the community that's being built, the product that's being built, is much more similar to behaviors that fans express, mainstream fans express in the physical world, but expressed digitally. So when they come together, you have a social feed on the product. You can see what other fans are doing. You can play games with other fans. You can win prizes playing against each other, playing with each other, chatting with each other, et cetera. Just basic things that didn't exist 3-4 years ago. And so today the product is much more sticky with the mainstream fan, and you can do many more things on it. There's still a marketplace. There's still assets being bought and sold for thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that shows kind of the strength of the collectible economy and sort of the high end. But it's changed a lot in the sense of the value propositions that it offers to customers have expanded. Now, the whole industry has gone through dramatic correction, right? Whether you talk about NFTs, where you talk about crypto more generally, and the thing with crypto is it's reflexive very powerfully on the way up, huge virtual cycle, but then very reflexive on the way down. We have vicious cycles that kind of put the industry in a multi-year kind of stasis. They call it winter. For several years, there's very, we see it in even our user acquisition. When you mention the word NFT or blockchain, 3 years ago, you would get 10 times higher clicks. Today, you get 99% lower clicks. And so that headwind has caused issues with the growth, obviously, for people who promoted it, are sort of the attitudes change over time. But the good news is it's all coming back in a much more sustainable way. Over the last 6 months alone, we've doubled the average revenue per user. We're getting 3 times as many new users coming in this year as last year. And again, the product's much more sticky. So if you think about the ways we're going to integrate within the fan experience, we want to be everywhere the fan is. And anything you do in the worlds of NBA, NFL, Disney, whether physical or digital, we want you to get rewarded inside of our product. And the status that you gain within our product by kind of investing in your fandom, we want to make sure is rewarded in these other ecosystems.
So why do you think that users came back if, like you said, search, getting search traffic into this stuff has kind of plummeted? Why do you think some of those users came back? Why is it growing? Is it that they're playing more games inside? Is it this kind of social? Is it that it's a social media platform?
Our two biggest sources of users right now are coming either directly through the NBA app. So if you go sign up for NBA ID, you get your first NBA Top Shot pack. Those users are very valuable. They still have to kind of dig to find it inside the product, but that's been a very valuable source of users. And the second most valuable source of users was during the NFL season. Many of the games, at least one every week, you went to that game, you got a digital collectible from that same game. So it was much more integrated into the fan journey, and they kind of got introduced to that concept of, hey, these are digital things, I can save them over time, I can maybe sell them on the marketplace. Those users, incredibly sticky as well. More recently, there's been some influencers that are starting to talk about it, small scale folks, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 followers. But those users have also been very sticky because they're coming in through kind of personal referrals and stuff like that.
I see. So we're in DC, and you've recently been lobbying on a bill which was described to me as protecting against future overreach to define all Web3 products as securities. I'm curious, is that an accurate description of kind of what you're pushing for?
Well, I mean, the fight that Dapper Labs has fought since the very beginning, and in the US, EU, abroad, is just drawing that distinction between, hey, crypto for financial use cases, which we still support regulation there in terms of stablecoin bill, market structure bill, fantastic, bring that clarity. But we're trying to carve out this road of, hey, we're just building consumer products here. And our consumer products are actually better for the consumer than the equivalent, which is these assets being sold in games and whatever it might be. And so we've largely been successful there of trying to carve out a lane in the EU and in the US. In the US, we have the New Frontiers in Technology Act, the NFT Act, that might get folded into the FIT, sort of the broader framework. But the point being that these are consumer products, and now with the new administration, including kind of meme coins, these are consumer products sold to consumers, and so consumer protection law should apply, but securities law doesn't really make sense when we're talking about digital trading cards or cats on the blockchain.
So you alluded to this, but I want to kind of stay here for a sec. You obviously were interacting with members of the previous administration and this administration. Do you feel that this administration is more open and friendly to kind of what you're trying to accomplish?
100%. In the early days of the administration, it was almost a meme of kind of the, hey, Trump is for crypto. But I think what we've seen in this administration and this president all the way down is actually an openness to doing business on a new technology. That's what we care about the most. It's not the prices or sort of people going out and buying these tokens. It's more, can we innovate, or are we scared of a regulator knocking on our door and kind of criticizing us even though we're trying to be good actors and build products that add value to consumers? And I think that's been the case across all our peers as well. In the last administration, you saw enforcement actions being taken against some of the most well-known and good actor companies in the ecosystem. And we're just very happy that from a kind of design standpoint, every product idea we've ever had has effectively been greenlit, and now the only thing that matters is, will customers find it fun? Of course, we have to protect customers, make sure we're creating something that's sustainable and sticky, but we're not scared of kind of being caught in a world where there's no rules defined, but still everyone's getting censored for not following the rules.
Do you expect that Congress is going to take up legislation? I mean, you've been meeting with folks on the Hill, you've been pushing for it, you're here in rooms like these. Do you expect that this Congress might
We think people have gotten really smart, yeah, absolutely. On both sides of the aisle, there's support on the regulator side, on the administration.
What's the argument that you're making to Republicans versus to Democrats?
I think it's the same thing. It's that this innovation is going to happen somewhere. It should happen in the United States. And fundamentally, it protects consumers because this technology is about auditability. It's about openness. It's about transparency. and it's about creating new opportunity for builders to create value on top. And so it's a simple message to everybody. And the good news is that because we have NBA, NFL, Disney, these are the most loved brands in history. And all we're saying is, hey, people are spending their lives more digitally. Everyone here can attest to that. And your kids will be living life more digitally than you will. We want to make sure that in that digital world, the ownership, the control, the identity is not just controlled by these big companies that, by the way, are also controlling the AI models that are telling us what to do. But these are open systems that everybody can audit, everybody can trust, anybody can access, and that's fundamentally what we're all about.
You were mentioning to me something backstage that was kind of confusing me and making my head spin a little bit. You mentioned that as Dapper Labs has produced that AI has basically already kind of changed the digital collectible space. That you guys have a digital collectible AI tool. Help me understand, what are you talking about?
Well, she's a virtual character.
Virtual character.
So she's actually one of the leading virtual influencers in the world. She's got millions of followers on TikTok, millions of followers on Instagram. She's not a real person. When she was originally created, she had a whole team that was motion capture studio, video editors, etc. Today, she's fully AI powered. But what's not as interesting is what we can do with AI and sort of powering her. It's more the power that we can turn over to her community and make sure that she's really speaking in the voice of her community, because we can actually get out of the way and she can become a character that responds.
Who is her community, though? I do know who is following virtual influence. You've got, I believe you that virtual.
That's a wide-ranging answer.
Yeah.
Depends what kind of virtual influencer.
Yeah. Okay. So explain it to me.
Her community. I mean, she started. It's Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and she tries to be very relatable to little girls, especially. And you'd be surprised that a digital character in a digital world can make people open up a lot more than a physical, than sort of the real world. In a lot of ways, she can have shared experiences with different kinds of communities, and the sort of the connections she creates with people helps them open up, them discover themselves, them express themselves in a new way. And so she's trying to be the voice of, obviously sanity and sort of, maintaining kind of cohesion in a very brittle kind of world. But she's going to take up some health causes. She's going to try and educate folks around in ways that I think that generation will understand more. Now, in terms of like who's interacting with virtual characters, you've got a broad range, but you're going to be living in a world where you can learn from anyone you want to learn from, whether that's a real person, whether that's a person in history, whether that's or whether that's a character that represents you in a way that a real person kind of couldn't, because that person's fully virtual. That person is not bound by the same limitations that we all are. And thanks to AI, the conversations you have with that individual will eventually be as real as the conversations you and I are having together now.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Hopefully they can't come and replace stage moderators, but we'll have to leave it there because we're almost done. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Please welcome Evan Spiegel, CEO of Snap, and Kara Swisher, host of the podcast Pivot and On with Kara Swisher.
Hi, everybody. I think we're last, so we're between you and drinks, but we'll be fascinating. We're going to harness some meaningful conversation connections here. That's the name of our thing, but we're not going to talk about that. But anyway, we have a lot to talk about. Evan and I have known each other forever, since Snapchat started, where I met him in Venice, in Los Angeles. I mean, more than a decade ago, correct? 15?
I think I was probably 21 years old or something.
Yeah, you were, in fact, 21 years old. You were just out of college and adorable. And it's a low bar in tech. So look around, people. No matter what they do to their bodies, it's the same. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm being locust. I'm not really sorry. So let's start talking. I think we have, since we're in Washington, and by the way, your suit is fantastic. I dressed for you, obviously. Let's talk about the case that's going on with Meta right now, because Kevin, some emails about you have been entered into the case. You famously, Kevin Systrom of Instagram was on stage yesterday saying some not so nice things about Meta and Mark. talking about sort of not being given resources, being starved. You did not sell, that your offer was after, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and explain to people why you didn't sell at the time, because there was a lot of pressure on Facebook was gaining steam. How are you looking at this trial right now, looking back on that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's been a moment to reflect on our journey. At the time when Facebook offered to buy Snap, we just saw an opportunity to continue growing our business. Today we reach over 850 million people around the world. So we really saw an opportunity to continue to grow Snapchat, but we also were building Snapchat in a really different way. We're really focused on friends and family, people who actually knew each other in real life, and enabling a new way for people to communicate and express themselves without public likes and comments, without the social pressure that comes along with that. So we were taking our service, I think, in a different direction than social media was going at the time. And so we thought staying the course, staying independent, would not only allow us to build a bigger business, but would also allow us to stay true to our vision.
And so you thought it would be worth more. I think there's an email that actually was entered into evidence, and it's from Mark in 2013, October. He said, I just got off the phone with Evan. He said he enjoyed getting to know us, but he thinks he can build much more value on their own. For reference, our offer was $3.1 billion for the company plus $1 billion in retention packages. Someone on his board was advising him strongly not to take the offer. Evan did not even counter. When he pressed him on the number for a while, he told me it would be hard to walk away at $6 to $7 billion, but he needed to check before giving me a real number. This gives me some hope we can get this done on a higher end of the range between $5 and $6 billion. This is incredible, because it seems so cheap today. I suggested he get back to me. When you made that decision not to do that, how difficult was that? Because there was enormous pressure, and it's being sort of borne out today by a lot of people that are testifying against Meta at the time, sort of ran the game, essentially.
Well, I think Bobby and I were really convinced that we could build a bigger business, but we also just loved working together. We loved what we were doing. We loved building Snapchat and continuing to innovate on our own. And so I think staying independent has allowed us to continue to follow our vision, invest in things like augmented reality.
I know what that moment was like, because have you been called to testify in this trial?
I have not. No, let's.
Maybe now. Maybe now, that would be great. What would you say on stage if people were asking you about the pressure you got? Because what happened is they copied you quite a bit. As I joked, you were the chief product officer of Facebook for years, because they used to steal, that was the word I was going to use, your ideas. And you actually put it now on one of your designations as chief product officer.
VP.
VP, okay, sorry. What is that like to try to innovate when bigger companies are doing that? Because that's sort of been the story of Snapchat. You've been a very creative company, and others have taken your ideas.
Yeah, well, the first, we'd had some familiarity with their sort of attempts to copy this service before they made the offer. I think the first time they built something called Poke, which was almost like a like-for-like copy of Snapchat, and they put it in they put a banner at the top of Facebook, download Poke. And we were really worried that that people would stop using Snapchat and start using Poke, but the opposite actually happened. I remember it was like
it's called Poke.
it actually ended up raising a lot of awareness for Snapchat, drove more usage and growth of Snapchat. So I think sometimes their attempts to copy our business have actually helped drive growth. I think the same could be said for vertical video. So in the early days, back in the day, people actually put horizontal, those kind of like TV-sized videos on smartphones. That's how most people watched video on the smartphone, or you had to turn your phone to watch the video full screen. We really pioneered full-screen vertical video, but advertisers didn't want to create full-screen vertical video. They didn't want to cut their videos specifically for mobile. They didn't want to have to record custom videos. But as soon as Meta started embracing vertical video as a default ad format, that changed immediately. And that really provided a bit of a tailwind for our business. So I think just given their scale when they copy our ideas, sometimes that actually can provide a bit of a tailwind for our business.
So when you look at that, how is that like to compete as a much smaller company? Right now your company's worth 13 billion? Yeah, something like that. What is it like to compete against bigger players, and including TikTok now, because everything's shifting? Facebook is now saying it's not interested in friends and family. It's interested in broader entertainment, which is what TikTok is. They sort of have aimed at that. How do you look at what's happening in the social media space right now?
Well, I think one of the reasons why folks are shifting to look at entertainment is because ultimately engagement with friends and family is finite, right? You only have so many friends. They only post so many videos every single day. So if you want people to continue to use your service, you have to show them content from influencers or from publishers, or other folks who aren't necessarily your friends. And so I think what TikTok, what Meta has worked on, obviously, we also have an offering for influencers. We call them Snap Stars to share with their fans. I think folks have found that beyond just watching content from friends, people also want to see content from the broader world. And now, obviously, with AI, it's easy to personalize that content so you see something that's relevant.
What do you think social media is now? You were always more on the media in many ways, but with connections is what you were trying to do. And what do you do now, do you say?
Yeah, I think in general, when we looked at social media, we felt that the old model of social media would be unsustainable because there was a huge push to get people to add more friends so they would have more content in their feed. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, people were forced to add more and more people they didn't know, and that made them feel less comfortable sharing. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, our view was that we should build a service around people you do know very, very well, not encourage you to go add a bunch of friends, but really add the people that you care about and want to talk to. And then use AI to recommend content from influencers or people you don't know that you might be interested in watching, but not necessarily somebody that you're friends with. And so I think very early on, if you look at the design of Snapchat, we really had this messaging service. We have our camera so people can create all sorts of videos. And then we had stories or our Discover platform where we would surface content from people you didn't know. So I think very early on, we recognized that we would need to bifurcate our service into messaging with your close friends and family, people you cared about, and then recommend content from folks you didn't necessarily know.
So if you had to think about where social media is going now, obviously social media is getting attacked a lot for the impact on people feeling bad. Today there was just a Pew study that came out where young people were talking about, it's from Harvard, it's the teens and social media mental health. 48% of teens say social media harms people their age, up from 32% just a year ago. They also said 34% of teens say they get mental health information on social media, which is good, I guess. Depends on what it is. 48% of teens say social media harms people their age. It wasn't a particularly good product, recommendation. 44% of teens say they've cut back on phone and social media use. I know my own older kids have taken it all off. They use Snapchat for communication still, but mostly off. And because it makes them, and in one case, my son said, it makes me feel badly. How do you design given that's happening? And how do you look at those stats? Is that talking about you, or is it talking about Facebook, or which one? Well, Twitter, let's not even bring them into the conversation. They make you feel bad, I'm sorry.
I think for us, what's been really interesting is to look at studies that try to disentangle the different features rather than use the umbrella term of social media. So there was some interesting research out of the Netherlands recently. It compared Snapchat to services like Instagram and TikTok, and actually found that Snapchat was the only service that was supportive of people's well-being, largely because they were using it to communicate with their friends and family. And I think when you're talking about features that have the potential to make people feel bad, I think sometimes folks look at that as social comparison, so feeling like you're in a popularity contest to collect more likes and comments, or being exposed to harmful content. I think those are examples of maybe where social media can make people not feel great. And I think that's part of the shift that we're describing, where people are spending more time communicating with their friends and family, and then also watching recommended content. And on Snapchat, we moderate the content on our platform before it's distributed to our audience.
So talk about that idea of moderation, because the shift has been no moderation now. I mean, you have Facebook doing that. Obviously, Twitter's gone that direction very significantly. And so it's sort of it's a toxic waste dump over there. I call it a Nazi porn bar, but use any term you want. But how do you look at that push towards, why are you laughing? It's funny, it's true though, right? That's why you're laughing, because it's true. Not my kind of bar, but whatever. It takes all kinds, I guess. How do you look at when that occurs, where you have this idea of full free speech and you moderate? Reddit has gone in your direction a lot more. Certain services, there's sort of a bifurcation of how people look at these things.
Well, I think there's a couple of things we consider. First and foremost, we're really focused on empowering self-expression, making sure people feel comfortable expressing themselves. And in our view, that means that people need to be in an environment where they feel comfortable. And it can be hard to feel comfortable if you're looking at a lot of violent content or hateful content. It's hard to feel comfortable expressing yourself. So our general view, in terms of enforcing our content guidelines, is making sure we have an environment where people feel comfortable expressing themselves with their friends and their family. That's really important to us. I think the other thing, it feels to me like the concept of free speech or the First Amendment has gotten a bit twisted in tech, in the sense that the First Amendment applies to the government. It's basically saying the government needs to stay out of private individuals or private businesses and their ability to express themselves. The private individuals or businesses can choose how to express themselves. And so actually what allows internet platforms to moderate the content on their service is the First Amendment, right? Actually free speech provides that protection to businesses and to internet platforms. So I think when people are talking about free speech and kind of anything goes on their service, that's a choice that they're making that's protected by the First Amendment.
What do you think of those pushes towards that?
I think in terms of our service and the type of environment we're trying to create, where people feel comfortable expressing themselves, and people who might feel off-put by seeing violent content, might be less likely to express themselves or feel like, oh, this platform isn't for me. I think as we look at the growth of our service, reaching 850 million people today with a goal of reaching more than 1 billion, I think the way that we're going to get there is by creating an environment that people want to be a part of, and part of that, at least in our view, means content guidelines that prohibit hateful or violent content.
How do you look at this sort of shift in? I mean, not every tech bro is the same, right? You're all different, and I think people don't realize that you're very different. But the shift has been rather significant, sharp rightward shift. I don't even know your politics, actually. I didn't know most of their politics for much of the time I covered most of these people. Now I absolutely do, which usually it's just right with a shade of weird. I don't really understand what's happening in a lot of them. But how do you look at what's happened to the image of the tech industry? It's personified by Elon, but the rest, there's a whole gang of them. Someone just wrote me, called it the zombie. Someone very well known said more a zombie apocalypse, and it was another person who had shifted over.
Well, I think generally speaking, the tech industry is very focused on continuing to innovate. I think that's really, really important for our country's future, for the well-being of the world. I mean, the story of America over the past 250 years has really been productivity growth driven by innovation. So I think that's vitally important. And I think if we look at the last 4 years in the United States, I think tech leaders increasingly felt like the administration was making it more difficult to innovate. And I think in many cases that was well-intentioned, right? Trying to put more regulation in place around AI and things like that. But in a highly competitive global environment today, there was increasing concern that the administration was not aware of the importance of technology in terms of determining America's future. And I think people found that with the current administration, there was more receptivity to technology. There was more willingness to take, maybe more of the Bill Clinton approach to deregulation of the internet, deregulation of AI, that has allowed in Clinton's case, the internet industry to flourish, and perhaps in this case, to allow, further acceleration of AI. So to me, I think of it less as a political shift and more, in terms of the technology industry really trying to figure out, what sort of political environment will support innovation.
But you've been noticeably absent it's been quite right-wingy. I mean, it's not just get out of our way. And that's been since Bill Gates, since I met Bill Gates 40 years ago. Get out of our way. It's something more deep. But when you look at that, how do you involve yourself then? If you're for innovation and you want less regulation, et cetera, how do you not get pulled into that?
Well, I think with every administration we've tried to engage productively, and typically for us that means privately. That allows us to really understand the goals of the administration, what they're trying to accomplish. I think in the case of this administration, we've heard about how important it is that we invest in American manufacturing, or how important workforce training is. Those sound, at least from what we've heard, are really big important priorities for them. And with every administration, it's different. But what we found to be most productive, at least for our business, is engaging privately, understanding their priorities, and then finding opportunities where we can work together if that's possible.
We just have a few more minutes. What's the most important thing you need from this administration?
I think one of the most important things for business in general is a stable business environment. Yes. I think that's really important. But I think that's...
Sorry, but go ahead.
I think that's difficult at this period, in this period of time where there is intense change happening in America. I think there's a real recognition, at least over the last 5 years, that America is more vulnerable than we thought we were, right? I think the pandemic exposed a lot of reliance on, single source supply chains, which I think is risky. I think, if you look at our fiscal position as a country and the massive deficits we're running, I think people feel that that's a real vulnerability for our country. I think the Ukraine war has exposed that it's very difficult now for us to, defend and provide a security umbrella to the whole world, which is another really concerning vulnerability, because that security umbrella enables globalization and free trade. So I do think that Americans today are uniquely aware of all our vulnerabilities in a way we haven't been in decades, and so change is going to be required. And so I think the question is, what are those changes going to be? How can we make them in a way that's least disruptive to our economy so we can continue to invest in American success? But it's not an easy task, given how complicated the environment is.
What would you like to see this administration do, and what would you like to see undone right now? And then I want to ask you about the glasses.
Well, I do think this administration is very focused on the success of artificial intelligence. I think that is mission critical to our country's future. I think that's critical to driving productivity in the face of huge population declines around the world. I mean, America is less exposed to that challenge, but still exposed. And I think if we're going to navigate this coming population collapse globally, which is already well underway, I think we're going to need tools like artificial intelligence to continue to support the quality of life that we enjoy today. So I do think that that's really important, and it's been so far encouraging to see that support.
So what does that mean? What support? What would you like in terms of support? What would be critical or smart?
Well, I think in this case, a lot of what we've seen from the administration is encouraging investment in AI, trying to take a lighter touch regulatory approach until we have more clarity on the areas where there are real risks that do need to be regulated. And I think that sort of practical approach to regulating AI based on real risks, I think, will
Often,
serve
though,
the
it's
country
after the risk has happened. What is the thing you're most worried about then, as you're starting to see it develop? Obviously, you've had some snafus going forward, but what is the biggest risk from your perspective?
I think, now we're jumping around a little bit, but I think the biggest risk from my perspective, as I see it today, is an accelerated decoupling from China. I mean, I think that is certainly on the table. I think, Americans are realizing that there are some risks to the current state of the relationship with China, but how we navigate that going forward and do so in a way that China can continue to succeed, that America can continue to succeed, and we can continue to support the globalized world we live in that has led to extraordinary improvements in quality of living around the world for billions of people. That's really important, and I think that's at risk today.
And your biggest issue with AI, if you had to pick one, meaning problematic issue?
I do think we need to really think ahead about what the impacts will be on knowledge workers, on white-collar workers. I think if you look at America today, it's very clear that blue-collar workers have been impacted by globalization, by moving manufacturing overseas, by automation and productivity, which has been a huge driver in the decline of manufacturing jobs here in the United States. I think we could see a similar phenomenon with white-collar workers. I'm not sure over what time frame, but I think it could be highly disruptive. And so I think paying really close attention to that and trying to think about how to address that from a policy perspective will be really important. Over the long term, I think it's mission critical that we adopt AI, that we benefit from those productivity gains. But the transition, this period of change, I think could be quite challenging.
So last question, I want to talk a little bit before we end for like 2 or 3 minutes about your glasses. I love all the glasses, and Scott Galloway makes fun of me because I like all the different. I like the Apple ones, even though they're quite heavy. But for people who don't realize that Evan's been the earliest about all these Snaps spectacles and things like that. Talk about where that's going, because Apple's coming at it again, despite not so much pickup for their Vision Pro. Obviously, Meta's doing very well with its glasses. They don't do that much. Like, they answer the phone and play music and play my podcast, so I listen to myself, which is really kind of egomaniacal. But it doesn't do much. They don't have a lot of efficacy. They're fine. They're like having AirPods in your thing. Where do you see? How are you looking at spectacles right now, and especially with AI involved in it? And Google just is starting to roll out a lot of this stuff now, also.
Yeah, we're extremely excited about what we're doing with augmented reality and with our spectacles, AR glasses. started working on them, I think, about 11 years ago now. They started with really, really simple glasses with just a camera in them, and over time have now evolved to incorporate a display so you can overlay computing on the world around you. But the fundamental opportunity we see is to change the way that people use computing. Today, computing feels very isolating. People are stuck behind a screen. When I was growing up, I had to go to the computer lab at lunch to use a computer, or folks are looking down at a very small smartphone screen. And I think we constantly hear that people feel like it takes them out of the moment. It takes them away from their friends, out of the real world. And with glasses, we see a real opportunity to integrate computing into the real world and also make it an experience that is shared. So for years, I've talked about this vision of looking out the window of our house and seeing our kids running around playing together outside, and looking at my wife and saying they just won't get off the damn computer. And that's really the vision that we had, that computing can be shared, that it can be something that people can enjoy, and that brings them outside and together. And it's literally 2-3 weeks ago now, I was looking out the window, and sure enough, 2 of our kids are running around. The glasses are a little big still, so they're holding them with one hand, but they're running around, jumping and playing together. And it was just so exciting to see that computing can be something that brings people together in the real world in a way that isn't possible with the screens and the smartphones.
Now that everybody's jumped in, I mean, the planes are covered with the bodies of pioneers in a lot of ways. How do you feel about competing against now Apple? Google just introduced them. Meta is obviously doing not as well with the stationary ones, but very well with the Ray-Bans. How do you look at where it's going next?
So one of the reasons why we push so early and quickly into building out our own operating system and our own platform is because we believe that will enable us to compete more effectively going forward. It's really easy to copy glasses with a camera inside of them. It's very difficult to copy all of the AR experiences that are built by developers today on Snapchat or on our glasses. So we're now on our 5th generation of the glasses. We have all sorts of developers building amazing things for spectacles. And so when we're ready to share them with consumers, not only will there be a full set of experiences available, but I think we'll be better positioned to compete because we've worked not just to develop glasses, but to develop an ecosystem around them.
What is the best use of them right now?
The best use right now, my favorite is playing with our kids. We have basically a way to play make-believe with dinosaurs, but you can share that experience together. So you can build your whole dinosaur world and run around outside and play together.
And see the dinosaurs.
That's a ton of fun.
Ton of fun. Ton of fun. All right, 2 last very quick questions. Your company was started with the idea of privacy and disappearing messages. Right now, people are very worried about what's on their phones, surveillance and everything else. And in some cases, I have a lot of friends who are leaving the country who are on green cards, their phones are looked at and stuff like that. How do you feel about privacy right now and what you're doing at Snapchat?
That's an interesting question. Privacy has always been so important to us because it's critical to free expression, right? To people feeling comfortable expressing themselves. And I think folks say all sorts of things in private with a close friend or a family member that they wouldn't say publicly to the whole world. And so I think as we've looked at architecting Snapchat and building Snapchat, that privacy has been central to a product that does make people feel comfortable expressing themselves. And I remember in the early days, just the notion of deleting messages after they were sent was so radical, because back in the day with a hard drive, the old school plate hard drives, it was more expensive to delete something because you had to write over it, and that would actually wear out the hard drive disk faster. So it was easier to just leave it there and not delete it, and then eventually write over it, with some new piece of data at some point. And so we actually had to do a lot of work to make the case for why it makes sense to build technology that reflects the way that we communicate every day. I mean, the vast majority of our conversations aren't recorded, right? Whether they're on the phone or FaceTime or face-to-face, the vast majority of human expression isn't recorded, and I think it's important that technology reflects that as well.
Okay. Last question. There's an opening at the top of Doge. Would you consider taking it?
I empathize because it's a very challenging and thankless job. And one of the reasons why is because I think something like 70% of our budget in the United States is mandatory spending, right? So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the interest expense, which I think is now north of $1 trillion. So the vast majority of our budget you can't really touch. And then you look at the federal workforce. I actually looked this up the other day. Since 1990, when I was born, the federal workforce has shrunk. It actually went from 3.4 million people to about 3 million people today. And the US population over that period of time grew by about 98 million people. So I think you have a federal workforce that's smaller today, supporting far more people. But I think most importantly, I also had ChatGPT estimate the number of rules and regulations, federal rules and regulations that have been put in place since then. It's 140,000. So you have a smaller workforce supporting about 100 million more people with 140,000 more rules and regulations. So my general view, I think, of these efforts to reduce costs in the government
There've been many.
really has to start with the rules and regulations. If you want a smaller IRS, let's simplify the tax code. I mean, we can create a flat tax on income, dramatically clean up the tax code, reduce the need for audits, and then ultimately, you could reduce the workforce. But I think it's not realistic to reduce the workforce without simultaneously reducing the rules and regulations that make it so hard for that workforce to get their jobs done.
So a chainsaw wouldn't be your prop, I suppose. What would be your prop?
The magic wand, I think.
I'll leave it at that. Evan Spiegel.
Please welcome back to the stage Justin B. Smith, CEO and co-founder of Semaphore.
Really just to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay C-sharp, you especially. Please, anyway, thank you for a great day, and we hope to see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when the show begins again with a whole range of phenomenal conversations, a few cabinet secretaries, more CEOs. But thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.